Good morning, everyone. Hope you are all warm this beautiful Saturday morning. My name is Mahlatse Mahlase. I am the Secretary General of the South African National Editors Forum. For my day job, I am the Editor-in-Chief of Eyewitness News. Thank you very, very much for joining us for the Ethics and Credibility Conference. We have in the room journalists, members of civil society, academics, basically all people who care about our democracy and the role of journalism in strengthening this hard-won democracy. We are really excited about today and we are looking forward to your input. Just to give you a bit of background, exactly 2 years ago, the South African National Editors Forum embarked on a journey of introspection in an effort to self-correct. At the time, we were worried about the erosion of public trust in the face of allegations that part of our media was captured, some stories were being withdrawn, and editors were being forced to apologize. We then launched the Media Ethics Inquiry, and it was not to apportion blame or culpability on any individual journalist or media entity, but it was to strengthen adherence to ethical codes and enhance the public confidence in the practice of journalism. We really want to ensure that we can firmly secure our role of an accountable, trustworthy, informative media that is free from any manipulation. So today, we mark a very important milestone in that very journey. Today, we are hoping to emerge with a social contract that will chart a way forward for South African journalism. We have great speakers lined up. We will also get some feedback from the webinars that were held ahead of the conference today. And we will also get more input from you so that we can finalize the media ethics plan that will chart a way forward for us. Let's take this conversation to social media. Our hashtag today is hashtag ethical journalism essay. And we are hoping that you will also be able to use the chat box or the Q&A box so that you can give any questions that you might have. Please just be aware that this session is being recorded. There are also media houses that will be taking part of this session live. So let's just all be aware of that. Without wasting any time, I would now like to welcome the chairperson of the South African National Editors Forum, Sbu Ngalwa, to officially welcome us to the SANEF Media Ethics Conference.
Thank you very much, Mahlatse. Colleagues, guests, esteemed speakers, good morning. It's almost unbelievable that it's been 23 months since we announced the launch of the Media Ethics and Credibility Inquiry. At that point, we had an idea of what we wanted to see out of the process, but we did not know where the path would lead us. That we have reached this point is no mean feat, ladies and gentlemen. It is quite a remarkable achievement. As you would all know, that introspection is uncomfortable, but we also do know that it is necessary. And that is why we appointed an independent panel led by Judge Kathy Satchwell and assisted by talented and award-winning journalist Nikiwe Bikitsha and our veteran Rich Mkhondo. When we set up the panel in June 2019, we set out the terms of reference wherein we said that we wanted, quote, an investigation into allegations of ethical breaches on the part of the media in South Africa and those obstacles to accountable and credible media practice in a democratic environment. Again, in January this year, when the panel released their report, SANEF issued a statement noting that while the South African media has been lauded for courageous investigative work that has helped advance our democracy, as SANEF, we believe the media must continuously introspect to strengthen the relationship of trust that we have with the public we serve. And in welcoming that very report, we continue to say that we will rigorously debate the 69 recommendations to assess them and to see how they can be implemented in the advancement of ethical journalism that is at the heart of strengthening our democracy. And ladies and gentlemen, that long and arduous road has brought us here. It has not been an easy one. We have navigated sharp curves and uneven surfaces. We have had obstacles along the way, and some have pelted us with stones. But as we say in isiXhosa, zikhonkotha ehambayo, meaning that dogs do not bark at a stationary vehicle. That tells us, ladies and gentlemen, that we are on the right track. And as I said, that the road that brought us here has not been without challenges. We had hoped to have this conference at least sometime last year, but we know the devastating effects that COVID-19 has had on our industry as well as society. And sadly, we've lost some colleagues along the way, and may their souls rest in peace. COVID-19 has had a devastating effect on our industry, and it has decimated newsrooms along the way, and we have lost not less than 1,000 jobs in journalism. But that said, there have been a few important green shoots, ladies and gentlemen. Over the same period, we saw audiences return to traditional media as they looked for trusted news sources. The rise in digital audience figures of news sites is proof that the media is relevant in the advancement of democracy. And in times of crisis, our communities and our audiences turn to the media. And this is noted in SANEF's report on the initial impact of COVID-19 in South Africa, which showed an increase in the demand for accurate news from credible sources, both online and in broadcasting. And I think the uptick that we saw in the traffic to news websites, some going up by as much as 72% in March of 2020 alone, underlines the importance of a credible and an independent media. As we battle with the existential threat to the media, and at a time where we find ourselves under constant attack from our detractors, we continue to be on the receiving end of misinformation and disinformation campaigns. When I spoke at the SANEF fundraiser earlier in the year, I pointed out that the biggest threats facing our industry currently is not just the bullying from politicians who evade scrutiny, or the established criminal networks who make physical threats to journalists, or a hostile police force who block journalists from doing their job. I pointed out that the challenge we faced as an industry is the sustainability of the media. As you would know, that the Ethics Inquiry report made a number of specific recommendations on the sustainability of news media. These recommendations have been used as key inputs into a research report commissioned by SANEF in support of our ongoing work on journalism as a public good and how South Africans can get maximum access to news services in the digital age. We are launching this report on policy options for media sustainability today as part of our comprehensive response to the Satchwell inquiry recommendations. We will use this report to guide our interactions with government, corporate South Africa, funders, civil society, and the broader public. This will also guide us as we look for different ways to support journalism as a public good and as a key pillar of our democratic system. Ladies and gentlemen, this research captures the emerging international consensus on the need to support journalism as a public good, as is reflected in the Windhoek +30 declaration that was issued by UNESCO on the 3rd of May, which is World Press Freedom Day. And some of the policy proposals in the report talk to the establishment of a media sustainability fund to support the development, sustainability, and independence of public interest media and strengthening ethical practices in pursuance of the right to freedom of expression and democratic principles. And we also propose the zero-rated access to public interest news. Some of the proposals, ladies and gentlemen, include tax relief, subsidies, and other support for media sustainability. This report is now available on the SANEF website, and we will later take a closer look at some of its recommendations. I speak on behalf of the entire SANEF Management Committee and Council when I say I'm glad that we've reached this point. And I think it is also significant that we host this conference on the year of the 25th anniversary of SANEF's founding. It is also significant that we host this conference and this important juncture. And in this conference, ladies and gentlemen, we will debate the recommendations of the Satchwell report and come up with a 5-year action plan that will help us pivot our journalism on the highest ethical standards. And the objectives of this conference is also to find ways to restore the credibility of our profession that has been subject to intense scrutiny over the years. We all know that the Satchwell report has already shown the light on the ethical flaws we've experienced along the ways. Let us then use this opportunity to reflect on the report and also come up with a way forward. And whatever proposals that we make here today, and that will make it into our action plan, and especially on media as sustainability, we have to make sure that they do not just favor established media companies over community media and other small entrants. Here we have an opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to shape the future of South African journalism. We all know that we need a media that recognizes and represents the diverse people of South Africa, a media that speaks to them and for them in the language that they understand. The need for a strong local media and the development of African languages cannot be overstated. It must also be understood that our efforts here today are not about preserving the old, but we're looking for a new future and an inclusive future. One of the proposals in the first webinar that we had was a call for us to lobby the Department of Education to include media literacy in their life skills syllabus, with the emphasis on tools to avoid fake news, disinformation, and misinformation. I believe that is an important suggestion, ladies and gentlemen, as we also believe that a well-informed nation is a progressive one. We're also not here not to cover our tracks and defend each other, but rather we want to scrutinize some of the ethical issues that continue to afflict our industry. That is why here we've invited media owners, practitioners, associated industries, political parties, and civil society, because we believe that the media is an important cog in the smooth functioning of our democratic project. I welcome our speaker who have not only donated their time, but will also share their invaluable insight as we look for answers to better understand our ever-changing media landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, let us use this conference to rigorously debate ways to ensure that our media continues to be robust, strong, and to act independently. I believe that the journey that we're about to embark on will be of great benefit to future generations. The work that will emerge from this conference will be part of a seminal contribution to the advancement of journalism in South Africa. And with those few words, Comrade SG, I welcome all of you here and I thank you for listening.
The South African National Editors Forum's Media and Ethics Inquiry would not have been possible without our partners who share our passion for ethical and quality journalism. When we went out and said we wanted to start this independent inquiry, many of them opened their hearts and most importantly, their pockets so that this could actually be possible. Those who supported it include the Wraith Foundation, the Social Justice Initiative, and ABSA. And to them, we continue to say we are truly thankful. I would now like to welcome Ms. Sazini Mujapelu, who is ABSA's Head of Citizenship and Community Partnership, Community Investment.
Thank you, Program Director, Chairman of SANEF, Mr. Sbu, Judge Bernard Nkope, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. My name is Sazini Mujapelu, as you've already heard, and I am the Group Head of Citizenship and Community Investments. It is a privilege for me to be here this morning to share brief comments about our partnership with SANEF and the significance of the work that you have done through the Media and Ethics Inquiry. When SANEF approached us about supporting certain aspects of the inquiry, we immediately saw an opportunity to contribute towards nurturing our democracy and improving the well-being of society at large. Media in its various forms influences our decision-making processes at business, community, and at personal levels. As a society, we have come to understand the impact of the media in guiding policy and social change and its role in promoting a heightened understanding of the social problems confronting us. We are also acutely aware of the possible solutions that media presents, and most importantly, the power it commands in spurring us into collective action. This kind of work, therefore, resonates with our own values as an organization at so many levels. As a purpose-led company and as one of the big players in the financial services industry with a presence in over 14 countries in Africa, We at APSA are passionate about playing a shaping role in Africa's growth and sustainability. This is one of the critical pillars in our strategy. SANEF's decision to look into ethical challenges facing the media industry therefore boded well with our own developmental ambitions. We saw the inquiry as a clear acknowledgement of the critical link between good governance, ethics, and the existence of a robust and independent media. A further connection can also be made between democracy, press freedom, and socioeconomic advancement. It is our view, therefore, that strengthening the capacities of media to participate effectively in governance processes can only be good for building a sustainable future. The role of media in facilitating free and transparent flow of information to communities is an integral one. It does not only cultivate a culture of awareness, but conscientizes decision makers across all spheres of society about the impact of their decision on the communities that they serve. Beyond that, in a world where there are so many sources of information, people want to know that information they receive is accurate, relevant, and understandable. They expect you, the media, to explain in very simple terms why they need to care about what they are being told and the issues around them. We therefore today congratulate you, SANEF, for having taken this bold step, which has enabled the media industry players to reflect and introspect on issues that threaten to undermine their credibility. The inquiry has not only been an act of accountability, an important one, but a firm indication of utmost care for our democracy and the members of the public whom the industry stands to serve. I thank you.
Thank you very, very much to Ms. Sazini Mujapelo from ABSA, who were part of those that supported the SANEF project to have the media ethics inquiry. And now we're going to continue with the program for today and start introducing our first speaker for today. And I know this is a familiar face for many of us. He's always forthright, never cowers to the Twitter bullies, and always reminds journalists of their responsibility in building our democracy. He firmly believes that the news media has an ethical contract with society and that that contract is a very powerful component of our democratic architecture. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Songezo Zivi. He's a columnist, author, and former editor of the Business Day, and he is someone that's left the media industry with some ethical concerns, but he continues to offer his expert opinion on media and politics. Welcome, Songezo, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Mahlatse, for such a generous introduction. Firstly, let me thank the chairman and the executive of SANEF for inviting me today. As someone who was in the newsroom for a shorter time than all of you, I have to confess to being surprised to be asked to share my thoughts with you and the public. I am honored. Secondly, I want to thank the panel that produced a report that is comprehensive, brutally honest, but constructive. After reading it and reading it once more, I became worried that there would be nothing left for me to say. In advance, I ask you to forgive me where I repeat something you had already said in the report. In the event that I do, please take it as an indication of the profundity to our common goal, which is an independent and trusted news media that is an indispensable pillar of our democratic system. I want to preface my comments by offering my understanding of the role of journalism in a democracy and in an open society. I am sure most of you can recite the definition of democracy from school: a government of the people, by the people, for the people. While that is trite, I choose to describe it as a system of self-rule that relies heavily on many among the people accepting certain sacred duties that are essential for its preservation. Journalism is an indispensable pillar of democracy because it provides a channel for the elected representatives of the people and other public officials to communicate truthfully with the public, so that the people always know what is being done in their name. On the flip side, it provides a platform for ordinary people to share views with one another and to lay bare for all, including the people they have elected, to see what their needs are. Journalism plays another role, and that is to deliberately and doggedly shine a light on the dark corners where truth that is in the public interest may lay hidden. Again, this is so that people can develop informed opinions about those that govern them or hold very powerful positions so that they may use their own democratic power to hold them to account. Since journalists are not elected, their credibility and power are drawn from their assumed integrity, that they will always present an accurate, complete version of events and the facts. The public often takes what journalists write or say at face value because they trust them to be professional and ethical. This is an extremely powerful position for unelected tradesmen and women to occupy in a society. They can influence political events and the course of history, whether what they write is accurate or not. It is not beyond the realm of possibility for a violent protest to occur in which scores of people end up dead based on inaccurate reporting. As a result of this power, it is important for journalists and editors to remain humble and committed to truth out of respect for the public and its welfare. More than that, it is on the understanding that all of us have a duty to sustain the credibility of our system of self-government, an open democracy in which the people have the ultimate power. Journalists do not always remember this sacred duty. Some can be careless, arrogant, and untruthful. When their mistakes are pointed out, they can double down, and as the saying goes, stand by their story. This is not a good thing, this doubling down. And although not pervasive, we still see it too often for comfort. Let me propose for consideration some of the reasons for the damage caused to journalism in the recent past. The first is what I call unconscious arrogance. I want to take members of SANEF back to the time when the ANC attempted to pass the Protection of State Information Bill, aspects of which were decidedly anti-democratic. Correctly, this body raised hackles and lobbied for those aspects to be removed on the basis that this would affect the constitutionally guaranteed freedom of the press. Sure, this is true, but it missed a bigger point. The ultimate battle was not just about the right of journalists to publish the truth, but about the right of the public to know what was being done in its name with its powers and resources. It was then about how that attempt to block the public from knowing would affect those who seek transparency on behalf of the public, such as journalists and whistleblowers. This formulation, this humble formulation, is important because it places the democracy at the center of the problem and more clearly defines the mission and purpose of journalism. Journalists do not do the work they do for their own edification, but in service of the people and open democracy. The other formulation alienates journalists and journalism from the rest of society in that many ordinary people likely saw this as a battle between politicians and journalists. This suited the politicians just fine. The second cause of damage to journalism is the unwarranted tolerance of rogue journalists and media owners who routinely do not apply the appropriate standards of conduct and committed to truth that is expected. These are journalists and editors who are comfortable with providing insufficient or inaccurate context, make material omissions, or deliberately fail to give respondents sufficient time to respond. It still happens that media relations professionals get emailed questions on a Saturday to respond within a few hours on a complex matter that requires access to records that are likely in the office and in the hands of several people in an organization. In some instances, and I'm speaking from first-hand experience, some journalists do not even send a text message alerting you to the email. I cannot think of any other reason why this would happen except ensuring that the subject of the story has insufficient time to respond meaningfully or has no time to respond at all. Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story is a well-known adage that is perhaps only acceptable in fireside embellished tales than in newsrooms that take their democratic duties seriously. Thirdly, journalists also have inherent biases to which they should have more resistance than ordinary people, but they don't really commit to this self-discipline to their eternal detriment. For instance, the National Treasury is less likely to be closely scrutinized and questioned than any other government agency that I know. Sure, it has built its own strong reputation over the years, but the failure to scrutinize shortchanges the public and fails journalism's purpose. The same is true for private corporations. They may hate it, but they benefit as much from proper scrutiny as do public institutions. Continuously passing this test means higher levels of trust, which cannot be a bad thing for them. Of course, there are other little missteps and habits that seem benign, but are nonetheless insidiously harmful. The Secretary General or Treasurer General of the ANC is not your SG or TG, but Mr. Mandashe, Mr. Mahashule, and Mr. Mkhize to you. Julius Malema is not your CIC either. He is Mr. Malema. If you keep doing this, two negative things happen immediately. The first is that you fail the test of consistency. The DA does not have a president or any of these titles that we are used to, but a leader with a capital letter L. Do I hear anyone referring to leader Steenhuisen or leader Maimane, or maybe just leader? Of course not. So what happens? We often come across as if we are much closer and therefore more likely to be accommodating of the ANC and EFF, even if this is not the case. The second is that potentially construct an unhelpful impression that your relationship with a said politician can be something it is not supposed to be. And sometimes they get upset with journalists when they unexpectedly, to them, criticize them as if protecting their egos is the job of a journalist. You're all grown up, so I'm not going to turn each of these observations into a lecture on how to be vigilant and protect the role of the news media in our democracy. What I will ask you to do, though, is to reflect deeply on the big and small issues. On the big issues, you really ought to encourage further reflection on the role of the news media in our democracy and how that role is about the protection and advancement of an open democratic culture. The work of journalists is not different to that of judges. It is sacred. On the small issues, uncompromising commitment to standards is everything. In the recent past, some journalists have done egregious things that cause good citizens a great deal of suffering, as if they have no conscience whatsoever. Some of these colleagues of yours have steadfastly refused to apologize and make amends, preferring to take a deflective, amoral position that is no different to the politicians they claim to hold accountable. Having said that, it would be naive of me to speak as if the problem is created entirely by journalists. Owners have and continue to play their part too. Let me be blunt, the news media business is not where you invest in order to get rich quickly. If that is the intention, then you get Fox News, which does not qualify as a proper news channel. Instead, it is a verifiable threat to democracy worldwide. In our country, we have our own instances of owners using platforms they own to drive nefarious and damaging agendas. It used to be unthinkable, but these days it is not unusual to see a whole media group peddle dangerous xenophobic content based on lies and deliberate mischaracterization. I cannot think of any reason why this would be done, if not to create social instability and political anarchy. I also hope that there will be space in the coming months to have a meaningful discourse about the dark forces that are out to undermine democracy itself. These forces engage in two lines of attack. The first is sophisticated and concerted disinformation that seeks to undermine democratic institutions. These range from the most outrageous lies that under normal circumstances would be laughable, to the light touch magicians that use the cover of their professions to do the same. The objective of these purveyors of misinformation is to have the public so confused that it cannot separate truth from fiction and cannot trust anyone other than those who confirm their biases. Crucially, they want the public to believe that critical democratic institutions are inherently anti-democratic, thereby delegitimizing them in the eyes of the people so that they can no longer perform their functions. It is acceptable to criticize journalists or the content of stories, but not the egregious and dangerous cyber and physical bullying, especially of female journalists by hordes of sexist political followers who use language laced with threats of violence. This is fascist behavior. It is okay to criticize judgments, but it is not okay to seek to delegitimize the entire judiciary for spurious reasons. Please make no mistake. Anyone who does this, no matter how charming they otherwise may be, is a dangerous enemy of democracy. Assuming that they are sufficiently astute to understand what neutral institutions and journalists who cannot do their work mean, consistency demands that they be regarded with the contempt they deserve. People who engage in this kind of thing are anti-democratic. Of course, they will claim that freely expressing themselves is their democratic right. Our response should be, of course, we are so happy that you are showing your true colors. Now we can make an informed judgment about the extent of your hypocrisy and anti-democratic tendencies. If the news media is to play this role, credibility is everything. That credibility must be continuously earned because of consistently ethical application of the craft itself. I know that it is very hard being a journalist. The pay is poor, resources are scarce, and the work is dangerous. However, it is also a calling and a sacred duty. Let us continue to respect it and treat it with the reverence it deserves, for to do so is to honor the blood and tears of those who fought for this system of self-government we all ought to protect with all we have. I thank you, Chair, and over back to you.
Thank you very, very much, Songezo, and thank you for continuing to call us out when we air. And I think we're all listening there, and this conversation is definitely one that enriches our conversations and basically ensures that we do better. And thank you very much for your contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, those who are just joining us, thank you very much for continuing to be with us. We are now going to be going to our second speaker. If you see there in our chat box, there are links to the SANEF sustainability report that has actually been launched. If you do want to also get to look at it, please do go ahead and do that. It will also be available on the SANEF website much later on. Don't forget, we are in conversation, so we can take the conversation to social media. It's #EthicalJournalismSA. Our next guest has been grappling with the difficult times facing journalism. While he says that the revolution in news is ripping through our industry like a Category 5 hurricane, he also says we've stood on the brink of this existential crisis long enough to be frightened. And we should definitely be encouraged because he has been a journalist for more than 4 decades. Alan Rusbridger is the principal of Lady Margaret Hall in Oxford, as well as the member of the Facebook Oversight Board and chair of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. He was previously editor-in-chief of The Guardian. His awards shelf is overflowing, including the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for public service journalism. He has also been named Editor of the Year 3 times. He's also an author. His recent books definitely worth getting are Breaking News, The Remaking of Journalism, and Why It Matters Now, that was in 2019, and also the latest one, News and How to Use It, released in 2020. Good morning, Ellen, and thank you very, very much for joining us for our media ethics conference. I'm going to be inviting people on the call to also pose their questions in the chat group if there are questions that they want to pose to you. But I thought, let me start off our conversation saying that you do tell us a lot around, you advocate for quality journalism at a time when media houses really have skeletal staff complement and very limited resources. Some people have said to us, this is really a contradiction in terms.
Well, hello, it's morning here and it's very wet and miserable, so I hope it's better where you are. We know what doesn't work. We know that if you simply cut costs and merge newspapers and produce journalism that is not when nobody is proud of, we know that that doesn't work. So let's not go there. So of course, it's a cliche to say we should be aspiring to produce the best quality journalism. I think that's a necessity. We have to bear in mind that unlike 20 years ago, we have massive competition. For 200 years in the UK, we had a monopoly. If those who had printing presses and broadcasting studios effectively had a monopoly, now we're competing with billions of voices. I know I'm stating the obvious, but I think sometimes journalists believe that we have some special right to exist. We don't. And the only way we can justify our right to exist is by being better than the internet. And that means quality. So if you're saying, would I rather employ 10 reporters to do what my colleague Nick Davis used to call churnalism, i.e. just churning it out, or 5 journalists to do real quality journalists, I would always go for the quality. because people are smart. They can tell when you're failing and when you're just going through the motions of journalism. If they can see that you're doing stuff that matters to them, and that they can see the courage that went behind it, and that you're working to the highest ethical standards, I believe they will support you. So I can see that many journalists at the moment find things so hard because there's not enough money and not enough resources, and it seems that people don't love us. I think people do love us if we give them reasons to love us.
You know, obviously the big issue for us now in South Africa is how do we protect that journalism and build on the trust relationship between us and the public. But ethics becomes a really critical issue here. We've seen some editorial lapses, as our media inquiry report has said. What have you witnessed as successful practices in global media, just in terms of ensuring that we are able to tackle those ethical lapses within our industry?
Yeah, well, I'm sure you've had ethical lapses. We all have ethical lapses, and the UK had a really bleak period with the whole phone hacking saga that the Guardian revealed. So we've been talking about Fox News this morning. I think Fox News is a giant ethical lapse in itself. So I'm sorry you've been going through a rough period, but you're not alone. I think it's another cliche. All journalists say we have to regain the trust of the public. So let's agree that's something we have to do. I think there are some interesting techniques that I see going on in the best of social media. Of course, we could spend the next hour talking about how terrible social media is, but I think there are some interesting things going on social media as people work out this relationship between ourselves, not the people from above, not Rupert Murdoch or the proprietors. We've now got a media that is happening on the horizontal level. So let me give you some examples of what I see that is really good, say on Twitter. So I see sometimes really expert voices on Twitter who know what they're talking about. They don't expect to be trusted because they're experts any more than we should expect to be trusted because we're journalists. And so they have to earn that trust. So what they do is very basic things, like if they make an assertion, they will include a link. Or if they're talking about a report, they will have a screenshot and say, this is what I'm talking about. They'll give their evidence. They'll say how they know what they do, in the same way that academics use footnotes. And then they allow challenge. So they say, if you don't agree with me, or if I've got it wrong, please come into this thread and challenge me. And then they respond. So it's not, I'm handing down to you a tablet of stone, you must believe me. I'm happy to argue this point with you. And if I've got something wrong, I'll correct it. And if I don't correct it, everyone in this thread will be able to see that I don't correct things and I can't be trusted. Now, I think there's a 21st century techniques of earning trust in a horizontal world, rather than just saying, look, I trained as a journalist, I've done this for 20 years, you've got to trust me. And yet lots of journalists don't do the very things I've just described. They don't want to enter into conversations. They despise that sort of whole aspect of social media. They don't correct things. They don't show their evidence. They're not open to challenge, and they don't include links. So I think there are some basic things that we can begin to do that people in their other lives have come to expect if they're to trust.
So that transparency quite key. I will come back to you around the recent decision in terms of your position as the Facebook advisory board on Trump. But let me take a question that's come in from the chat. I think it's Adrian Besson who's asking, in your view, is there still space for a publication of record Is that still our duty, or has this function effectively been taken over by social media, especially Twitter, where all government entities, political parties, and corporations now have a channel where they can directly communicate with the public?
It's a really good question. So I think the main thing about journalism, and again, I'm sorry if I'm stating the obvious, is that it has to be independent of everybody. So the reason journalism came into existence in the first place is that people didn't know what had happened or what was true unless you had independent witnesses who could say, actually, this did happen, this didn't happen. That's the most basic function of journalism. And really, societies can't work unless you have people in society who can be reliably. So I think that business of bearing witness is still the most important function of journalism. Is that the same thing as a publication of record? I think publication of record is probably an old-fashioned term in the sense that the thought that you could turn to the Times of London and find everything that mattered as defined by a certain class of people, I think that has gone. You know, the internet, to some extent, it is the publication of record, but I still think that we should be attuned to what society wants of us in terms of bearing witness. So to take two current examples, you know, policy on COVID cannot work unless you've got a broad swathe of the population who agree on the facts. Otherwise, policy is important. That's going to be doubly so with climate change. You know, unless you have an educated public who believe there are certain facts about climate change, then no government can ever put in the measures that will be needed. So that's to my mind that is a kind of sort of publication of record. It's bearing informed witness, and I think that is it sounds terribly basic, but I think it's still the basic function, the most important function that we can do.
Colleagues, if you have questions for Alan, you can put them in the chat box there. We'll take one or two more questions. But I think that we're all curious to know if there's any lessons that, you know, have emerged in terms of the review of the Trump ban. I know that you've passed it back to Facebook to make that final decision, but anything that you can share with us?
Well, they're very difficult. We've done about 10 decisions so far on the board, and in a way, the issues that we're debating are 200-year-old issues, but in a new context. And we're there to try and protect free speech, but be very sophisticated about the reasons that are sometimes there to inhibit free speech. And quite often the discussions fall in this blurred territory between causing offense and causing harm. You know, was it simply a case that Donald Trump caused offense, in which case you could argue he shouldn't be banned, or did he actually cause harm? Well, we found that he caused harm. I suppose, as you say, we handed back to Facebook the decision about whether he should be allowed back, under what terms. And I think that comes back to having clear rules and understandings. You use the word transparency. So Facebook banned Donald Trump indefinitely. Well, you go to the Facebook's own rules, the word indefinitely isn't there. They can ban him permanently, or they can say, we're going to ban you for 2 weeks, but you can't have an indefinite ban. And so we said, look, you make the decision, you make the rules. We are there to oversee it, but you can't expect us to make the rules for you. And I guess all our news organizations are in the same boat, really. People will expect us to have clear rules and to live by them.
Let me take a question from the chat box there, and I'm not sure who it's coming from, but this says that the SANEF report reads in chapter 5, more than one informant commented on the massive arrogance of news people and the arrogance of print journalists and their disdain for readers. Although this was thought to have changed with the younger generation who speaks to readers, I'm interested to know whether Mr. Rusbridger agrees that a younger generation is better with engagement with readers, especially since the report also reads that young journalists act like fans with their sources. So is the younger generation much better in engagement with readers, as you find?
Well, I think there is something in that. It's a good question. I think the truth of us is that any of us over the age of, I'm going to be slightly arbitrary, but over the age of 40, if we grew up, and there was, by the way, there was nothing not to like about this. You know, we were on a kind of sort of a platform above the reader, and we almost literally handed the news down to the reader and said, here's the news. If you don't like it, write me a letter or whatever it was. But basically, we don't want to hear from you unless you've got a story. And I think that did give a sense of arrogance to a generation of reporters, or more than a generation of reporters, because we were on a different level, and we didn't in truth have much engagement with them. And then social media comes along, and suddenly they start answering back, and they're not respectful, and they're rude, and they're challenging. And journalists, the first reaction of journalists was to switch off. Well, our readers are horrible. We don't want to engage with them. Social media is a cesspit. We're not going to engage with that. And I think it's true that younger journalists don't come with that attitude because they've grown up with a different kind of engagement. I was talking a bit about that earlier. And so it comes more naturally to them to engage. I personally think we can't avoid that. I think that's positive. It doesn't quite answer the last point about young journalists acting like fans of their sources. I mean, it's important to keep your distance from sources and to be clear of why sources, what motives they have for giving you information. But I think if the broad thrust of the conversation, I think there are things that younger journalists just feel more at ease with than older journalists.
The downside, though, of that kind of robust engagement that social media does bring is the cyberbullying that we have seen of journalists. And what that does, especially in our context, is kind of having this very chilling effect on junior journalists, where we have seen politicians attack reporters on social media. It's been quite atrocious, especially for female journalists.
Yeah.
So how do we find that balance, even for the older journalists who want to use this platform as a perfect place of engagement, but have to deal with the vitriol and the attack on our integrity, and sometimes quite personal.
Yeah, and I completely agree, and it's a horrible thing. As I said, we could spend an hour talking about the underside of the dark side of social media, and there's a lot of hatred and unpleasantness out there, and but I think the answer is not to withdraw, because then you're leaving the playing field to all those guys to themselves. I think there's a duty on editors and the legal team that works for a news organization, if you've got one, to defend younger journalists. I think we probably all have to grow an extra skin. I think we should be very fierce with the social media companies, and every time you see it happening, you should probably have a conversation with them and say, look, our younger and female journalists are especially in the firing line. What are you going to do about it? So we should hold their feet to the fire. But I think the response to say, well, actually, we're just not going to engage is probably not the right one.
We struggle with that one in particular.
Everyone struggles, yeah.
Let me go to our chat box. I think this one is from George Clausen. The Guardian is, as far as I know, still the only newspaper in the UK with an internal ombudsman, the reader's editor. Our Satchwell Commission into Media Ethics recommended strongly that South African media should all institute an internal, independent public editor readers ombud. Why are the media still so resistant to internal ethical control?
It's a great question. I mean, I think I was the first editor in the UK to appoint an ombudsperson. And I did it because, actually, partly out of self-interest, because I wanted to spend my life editing. I didn't want to spend my life dealing with readers' complaints. And the act of saying, look, here's this person, here's their email address. If we get anything wrong, they will correct it on behalf of the newspaper. And I immediately felt liberated, because actually those of us who edit know it's actually the worst thing in the world when you know you've made a mistake or you've got something slightly wrong and you're going to have to spend all day correcting it and you don't want to correct it and so on and so forth. So having somebody to do that for you, I promise you, is a great liberation. But I think more importantly, it sends a incredibly valuable signal to readers. If we think of our interactions with other corporations, what would we feel if there was no telephone number that we could dial, or no complaints unit, or no customer support unit? We would not trust that organization. So I think to have somebody who is independent of the editor, has protected space, can quickly correct and deal with failings, is another way of building trust. The question is, why the media so resistant? It's because of loss of control. So if I'm a very controlling editor and I want to be the one that decides whether we're going to apologize or correct, the moment you create an independent editor, you lose that control. And some editors just can't bear that. I thought, well, actually, it's right. It's right. I mean, A, it's going to make my life easier, but B, it's right. And it's ethical. And if we want to build trust, we have to be seen to take readers' concerns seriously.
Yeah. Yes, losing control is a very difficult thing for all editors, but definitely worth thinking about, especially in terms of building that relationship with our audiences. Let me take one more question. This one is from Professor Glenda Daniels. Do you think journalists are too outside their communities? Because we were taught that we are the fourth estate, outside and above everything, and this could be part of the problem of today, our arrogance.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a delicate thing, because earlier I was saying the whole thing, the most important thing is to be independent of all interests. So you have to be independent of everyone, and yet you have to be embedded in the community. And the big problem in the UK newsrooms is a lack of diversity. Journalism has become a very middle class thing. It's a very white thing. And if you're reporting on a multicultural society, as the UK is increasingly becoming, and you have no Muslim reporters or black reporters, if you have too many men, not enough women, if they're too old, not young enough, you haven't got people who understand debility or poverty, then you're going to find it harder to reflect the lives of readers. That's bad editorially. And in the end, it's going to be bad commercially, because people will turn to the internet and they'll say, well, I find somebody here who seems to speak to me. That newspaper or that broadcasting studio doesn't speak to me because they don't understand my life. So it's good editorially and good commercially to think about that question and think about how to be inside the community and yet independent of it. It's a hard thing to pull off, but it has to be done.
Want to try and combine these two questions as we're quickly running out of time. One of them was, I've just lost it now, but more around whether, mainstream media can still hold control over journalism and should just accept that the role of community media has become even more important. And then there's another one from James de Villiers saying, with the rise of social media, we've also seen the rise of consumer-focused publications. Mentioning some examples as Business Insider and BuzzFeed. And he asked, do these publications play a key role in creating context for readers who are overwhelmed with information, or do they pose a threat to independent journalism as they force newsrooms to become smaller?
Just that's such a good second question. Just remind me, the first question was?
It was more around mainstream media adopting to the fact that focus now is around community media.
That's right, community, yeah. Well, so on the community point, I think we have to work harder to understand what our readers want. So I think all good journalism is a tension between what we think they should read. Sometimes it's eat your peas journalism. You may not think that you want to know about climate change, but we think you should. There's a tension there sometimes with metrics, which is, well, what do readers want to read? We'll give them more of that. And that in the end leads you to the Daily Mail sidebar of shame. It's just celebrities. So sometimes we have to say, actually, we're going to use our judgment about what you need to read. But the other side of that is that we sometimes need to listen to them and work out what it is that they consider important. And again, social media is often a useful guide. What are they talking about? What are they angry about? And sometimes it's things that that readers, that the journalists don't consider important. So both are important. But I think we can see that a lot of community journalism that grows out of the community and takes the concerns of the community as the starting point often feel the closest to the community and the readers. On the second point about aggregation, I think again this is a fact of the way the internet works. That organizations can behave like magpies and use stuff. I used to think that actually the things that I've advocated, so the live blog that is there all day long, in which you're linking out to other news organizations, is doing a similar kind of thing, but honestly, you're saying actually there's a really good account of this there, but come back when you finished, so that you make your news organization the sort of the one-stop shop, rather than other people doing it for you. So be there. And Jeff Jarvis used to have this saying, do what you do best, and link to the rest. I think that's a great saying, because if you don't try and do everything yourself, because you don't have to. And really these other organizations have got the similar idea. Do what you do best, concentrate on what you think is important, and link to the rest, because then people will come and they'll think, well, actually, if I come there, I will know everything that I need to know.
I'm going to ask you this last question because I think it's something that we are also struggling with as a South African media. While it's addressed to SANEF, I wonder if you have thoughts on it, which is they're asking, what will SANEF be doing to push for the protection of whistleblowers, thanks to whose courage so much valuable information continues to feed into the work of independent media and investigative journalism. But I guess in time in South Africa, to give you context, we've seen those whistleblowers lose their jobs, lose their livelihood as a result. And I'm wondering if there is anything that as a editors forum, or maybe a society, we could be doing to support the people who leak the information in the interest of democracy.
Okay, so I'm going to answer that in two parts. One is, have you got the best systems in your organization to protect whistleblowers? Have you made it really simple for them to contact you securely so that they can never be traced? Have you put enough effort into that? Have you put secure drops? Do you advertise those so that people can securely contact you? And have your journalists been trained well enough that they're not going to blow somebody's identity by contacting them on the digital systems that can easily be traced? So we have to play our part in protecting the whistleblowers by making it easy for them to contact us securely. The second bit is about advocacy and defense. And we all know as journalism that we couldn't do our jobs without sources, and that this is an honorable thing. It's not a dishonorable thing, that we need people who will tell us things unofficially. And we keep needing to make that case in public. A lot of official inquiries, I'm not saying this is true of the Satchwell report, I haven't read it in enough detail, but quite often it focuses on official channels of information. Well, fair enough. But we all know as journalists that it's the unofficial information that is often the most important information. And we need to make that case, because I think people sometimes don't understand what a whistleblower is, or how they can be honorable people with the best of motives. So that's my answer in two parts.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Ellen, for really that thought-provoking contribution. We are really, really grateful for you sharing your time with us. You will see in the chat box, there are quite a number of questions, but unfortunately, we have ran out of time, colleagues, and I think some of these we will continue in the latter part of our program as we start to chart the way forward. Our keynote address, our speaker for the day has arrived, and we would like to be able to move to that. So thank you very, very much, Ellen, for joining us there.
Have a great day.
Now welcome Justice Bernard Ngwepe, a man who wears many hats, including that of chair of the Press Council's adjudication panel and tax ombud. In all, he remains a passionate defender of our democracy and committed to protecting the public interest. He's a legal doyen, capping about 50 years as an attorney, advocate, senior counsel, to judge in the High Court, judge in the Constitutional Court, and the Supreme Court. In 2001, he was also appointed Chancellor of the University of South Africa, UNISA. Thank you very much for joining us, Judge, and it's over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and your guests from abroad. Thanks for this opportunity to be speaking to you. And let me say from the outset that I'm not presenting a researched paper. If that had been the request, I would have declined, because when I was asked sometime in the course of this week, I said, well, I readily accepted, because I took it that I was just coming here to think aloud, to speak from my heart. And when you speak from your heart, you don't need too many days to prepare and all that sort of thing. You don't need to do any research. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be quite conversational with your good selves. I'm just going to think aloud with you. And I noticed that you invited me, particularly in my capacity as, perhaps not in my capacity, but taking into account the fact that I'm the chairperson of the appeals panel of the Press Council. Now, yes, I learned a few things. I've been in that position for maybe nearly a decade or so, but I learned quite a lot about the media. One of the things that I learned, especially about journalists, is that there is sometimes an attitude which says, as long as the law does not prohibit it, as long as the code does not prohibit it, I can do it. But I think it's a wrong approach towards things. I don't think that which the law does not prohibit, that which the code does not prohibit necessarily has to be done. And we're talking ethics here, and ethics is not a body of rules that you find and beat it only in cold law, in the law of South Africa, or in the code. Ethics, as I hope to indicate later, the source of rules of ethics are varied. Some of them emanate from religion, our beliefs, and so on and so forth. But yes, let me start at the beginning, as I say. I become disappointed when a journalist, it would appear that a journalist attitude was simply, well, I can do it because the code doesn't prohibit it. I can do it because the law doesn't prohibit it. I think it's a wrong attitude. But why do I say it's a wrong attitude? I think it shifts away from what I describe as a fundamental objective for journalism. Perhaps that's where we should start. What is this fundamental objective of the art of journalism? I think it is to try and build a perfect society. Now, somebody would be quick to tell me it's impossible to attain or achieve a perfect society. That may be true, but we've got to accept that it's going to be a perpetual strife, because maybe we'll never reach a perfect society, depending especially on definition. But don't worry, even if we don't attain that perfect society, there are certain positive dynamics that are being released as we strive towards that perfect society. We improve people's lives for the better. We improve all sorts of things in our strive towards a perfect society, which we may not attain. But as I say, in the process, at least we begin to improve the lives of people. So that must remain the fundamental objective, the pursuit on the part of every journalist, that is building towards a perfect society. And well, a perfect society would be the one where there's freedom, there's democracy, and the ever so often elections, and there's equality, and so forth and so on. But there's one aspect in unpacking all these contents of a perfect society. There's one aspect that I would like to refer to, and that is patriotism towards society. It's patriotism towards one's own country. And let us be clear about this. When we speak about patriotism, we don't mean loyalty to a ruling party. We don't mean loyalty to the ANC or whatever, or DA, whoever is in power. We mean patriotism or loyalty to one's own country. And that point is very important with regard to the exercise of one's craft of journalism. You know, when America invaded Iraq, from the media, you could tell that there were journalists embedded amongst the military. But you couldn't help getting the sense that those journalists, well, they were good journalists, but at the same time, you couldn't help feeling that they were fiercely loyal to their own country. For example, they wouldn't have, as a matter of a scoop, leak information to the world that, oh, America is about to unleash the first bomb. America is about, they wouldn't do that. They only reported after the attack had already started to avoid alerting what they described as their enemy. I'm not talking the morality of the war. I'm just demonstrating a point, that there is a point somewhere when, as a journalist, as an endeavor to make a contribution towards a good society in which you live, you've got to exercise some patriotism. For example, I often ask myself, when I read some of the stories coming from the media, and they would say the police are about to do this. The police are about, they start, in some instances, they leak information which, in my opinion, could well prejudice the investigations. And I don't think that should happen. I think as a matter of contributing towards a good society, a crime-free society, we should refrain from divulging, as a matter of a scoop, divulging information which, for example, could prejudice police investigations. Again, I'm saying it's not whether or not the law prohibits you from doing it. It's not whether the code prohibits it, but it's just a matter of saying to yourself, would this be a good thing if I were to do that? Would this be a positive contribution towards a better society? And I think that should be the guiding principle. Now, why is it important that we should determine a particular objective in whatever we do? It's important to determine a particular objective because that objective is going to be your point of reference. It's going to guide your behavior. You know, it's difficult to live a meaningful life when you don't have points of reference. So what is your point of reference? In other words, what's your point of reference as a journalist in the course of your execution of your duties? What is your point of reference? Your point of reference, as I've said, is achieving a perfect society. Now, if it is your point of reference, then it means your conduct must measure up all the time to that particular point of reference. When you have got a fixed point of reference, a clear point of reference, you don't go wrong. A point of reference is important because it helps you make the right choice and right decisions. For example, if you get into a shoe shop, you see all sorts of beautiful shoes and the like, black, brown, whatever, and the like. When you get in there, you say, I want that shoe. The first thing the salesperson is going to ask you is going to say, what size? Now, your point of reference as you enter that shop, full of shoes, your point of reference is the smallness or largeness of your foot, is the size of your foot. And that is your point of reference, which is going to help you make the right decision. If you did not know what size is your shoe, it will be a problem when you get in there. But the first question they ask you is, what is the size of your shoe? Then you're going to make a selection among those many shoes, and for that matter, a correct selection with reference to the size of your foot. And when you are matured, your foot is no longer growing, is stable. We know that from that point on, once your foot is matured, you no longer grow. We know that you are size 6, and you know all the time. You see, that's the beauty of a fixed, clear, determinable point of reference. It doesn't mutate. It doesn't change like a Cape Town weather. It is there all the time to guide you to the right choice, to the right decision. So I guess if you have a partner, you want to decide what paint to put your house into, what color to paint your house. You discuss it with your partner may say, well, our neighbor's house is this color, but we can't paint our house the same way as our neighbor. You used as a point of reference the color of the paint of your neighbor, disqualify that color from being put on your house because you don't want your house to look like your neighbor's. You are very clear in your mind. You don't want a house that would be like that, like your neighbor's. But you have used the color of your neighbor's house as a point of preference to decide to make the right decision for your own house. So my point is, please let us be clear about our objectives. Because if we are clear with our objectives, then we are going to use them as a point of reference. Now, it brings me to the next point. And that is, what is the relationship? I think that's the crux of my thinking aloud. What then is the relationship between that fundamental, clear objective that you have set for yourself? What is the relationship between it and rules of ethics? Now, your rules of ethics must be reconcilable with your objective. They must drive you towards that particular objective. If any rule of ethics says to you, go that way, even if the law allows you to do that, even if the code allows you to do that, but that direction which a little voice in your mind says, take it, if that direction is irreconcilable with your known clear objective, then don't go there, because you'll be moving away from the objective. You can't afford to turn away from an objective. You see, if you walk into a room, you say to yourself, I'm going to pick up a remote in the living room, in the TV room. Your body, your feet, everything must direct, your energy must direct you towards that small little object, that remote, and you must move towards it. And that's what you want to do. Your whole conduct, your whole behavior as you enter that room must drive you towards that particular remote you are going to pick up. But the minute a little voice comes into your mind and says to you, move away from that objective, turn away from that objective. The minute you turn away from that objective, you are literally giving it your back. You are turning your back on it. And if you move, you execute any movement with your back towards that objective, you're going to pick it up. you'll never be able to pick up. You'll be increasing the distance between yourself and that objective. In fact, you'll be moving away from that objective. Simply put, you will not be able to pick up that remote. So your whole energies, your movement, your conduct must drive you towards achieving that particular objective, which is what? Working towards building a perfect society, moving into the room towards picking up that remote. And if you do that, lo and behold, you'll be able to pick up your remote. You'll be able to make some contribution in the broader sense towards building a perfect society. And that is the relationship between your objective and rules of ethics. They must be informed by your objective. And they must drive you, they must enable you to achieve those objectives. Don't worry about whether the law allows it or not. If it is not going to help you achieve your objective, well, then it's not good for you, then don't do it. But you see, the thing is this, I've said at the beginning that I'm worried when people try to determine their conduct solely with reference to the law and also to, say, the code. A journalist shouldn't do that. Those two things I've mentioned are not the only sources of good ethics. There are many other sources from which you should turn in order to determine whether what you are about to do is correct or not. And those sources may be, well, your religious belief. In other words, if the law allows you to do it, the code allows you to do it, but from another perspective, you feel it would be wrong to do it, well, then don't do it. Simply because there are various sources of ethics that there are various sources of rules of ethics, which rules are to conduct our behavior, which rules are to educate our behavior and help drive us towards the ultimate objective that we have set ourselves for. So I'm going to end up by saying that, when you pursue the kind of objective that I've mentioned, and you allow yourself to be governed by that pursuit of that noble objective and the like, the beauty of it is that in the end, as a journalist, you are going to find that you are not alone. You have got a lot of alliances, a lot of people, because there are many, for example, there are many nurses there who are in pursuit of a perfect society. There are many engineers who are out there in pursuit of a perfect society, just like you. Those civil engineers who design and build bridges, they are in pursuit of creating a perfect society. Those teachers who teach children every day, they are in pursuit of doing that. Now, you are going to have, if you are clear with that objective of yours of building, of striving towards a perfect society, you are going to find that you have got so many alliances, you have got so many people who are in pursuit of that same society that we are striving for. And the bonus, and this is the bonus of it all, of having those many alliances, so many people that are going to be in pursuit of the same cause with you. It's not only going to be nurses who are going to be your alliances. It's not going to be the engineers. It's going to be ordinary people. When you are trusted by people as a journalist, and they will trust you if you practice your craft in accordance with good ethics. They will have trust in you. And when ordinary people have trust in you, and this is the bonus of it, They will serve as your ears and as your eyes. They will entrust you in information because they know that you're a professional person, you're a person of ethics. You will be amazed as to how much information you get from society. Only, but only, and I'm concluding now, only and only if you are clear with your objective, which is striving towards a perfect society, and if your conduct and behavior and the manner in which you exercise your craft is informed by that fundamental objective, you'll get there. Thank you very much.
Hello, Judge Mwepe. Just one quick question, if you can take this one from Hassan Logard. And he's basically saying that he wants to know how we deal with the inconsistencies of the application of rights on the part of some of the media regulatory bodies. And the examples he's saying is that the BCCSA says that anyone may complain when they are feeling aggrieved, but the Press Council denies citizens to do so. And he says that this matter of local stand is troubling for many non-journalist activists who are critical users of media. And in addition, these limitations are violations of constitutional rights, in particular Section 13 of the Bill of Rights. Please advise.
I'm not sure I got the full question, but I'm sure I sense that you're worried about the issue of local standard. I don't know with regard to whether you mean with regard to people wanting to put in complaints against the media but not being allowed to do so.
Yes, that is what.
Yes, but I think we should understand the role of the self-regulatory mechanism, and that is to serve the broader interests of society. And I think when complaints come and they come from individuals, sometimes it's an individual person complaining about their personal hurt. That is understandable, but it becomes a problem sometimes when a person complains on behalf of some other person. And it might become quite complicated in that regard. And that is why you will find that there's a provision which says that let a person complain for themselves. But having said so, we do not bar people from raising complaints that may be of interest to the larger society. We actually accept those complaints and we adjudicate them. And in some instances, I personally, where a person had raised an issue that went beyond them, I personally, and they were not lawyers, ordinary people, I personally, in some instances, approached lawyers to represent those people because the issues go beyond that particular individual, the impact on society at large. The issue of sometimes wanting a person who is aggrieved to complain about themselves, it's just a matter of trying to make sure that the process is not abused, remains focused, and remains expeditious. I don't know if I answered the question.
I think you have. Judge, I'm going to just take advantage and just ask one more or two more questions that are in the chat. Colleagues, I know we're supposed to be going on a break, but I see a lot of you wanted to engage Judge Mwepe. And this one is from Terry. He says, while there may be arguments about what is meant by a perfect society, in general terms, could we not agree that the South African Bill of Rights embodies the very ethical framework that journalists should accept and work within? And that to do so would promote the achievement of the sort of perfect society envisaged. And then the last one I'm going to take, I saw is from William Bird, who's asking, what should happen to journalists who have been found to have violated ethical principles, sometimes frequently? A very controversial conversation amongst journalists.
Yeah, well, it's a good question because it has happened in the past. We have in the past found that there were very regular, as it were, regular. Maybe I shouldn't use the word I'm about to use, but there were people who contravened the code regularly, more than once. And I remember thinking that that perhaps we should make that point publicly known, that a particular journalist is a regular. I'll have to use that word, deviant, because time and again we would have to wrestle with that kind of situation. I don't think the code is strong enough on that particular issue. It's too soft. I don't know why. But no, there isn't enough sanction against people. In my view, there isn't enough sanction against people who offend regularly. And it lacks teeth in that regard. But there is something in it, though, which says that we can identify them and declare them as regular deviants. What was the other? Oh, the other one, I think, was just a comment about the Constitution. And I think that the code is for that reason that the code has been made to be aligned to the Constitution.
I'm going to thank you very, very much, Kelebo Rakaneti, for availing yourself to help us as we chart this way forward for South African media and recommit ourselves to ethical journalism. Thank you very much to all of our speakers so far who have contributed. We are going to be taking a comfort break, and we will be back at 10:45, exactly 10:45, colleagues. And thank you very much. We are seeing some of your tweets, hashtag ethical journalism. Let's continue the conversation there. When we come back, we are going to have those that moderated the webinars leading up to this conference, just summing up what emerged, and then hopefully we'll start the process of then charting that ethical plan for the next 5 years to ensure that we continue on this journey that we have started. Thank you very much.
There were a number of ethical lapses that we saw in the industry, and that had been happening for a while. But I think what brought things to a head was that retraction by the Sunday Times, where it retracted some of its big stories, some of them award-winning stories of between 2011 and 2016. We were fortunate to have an able and a committed panel led by Judge Satchwell and assisted by Nikiwe Bikitsha and Rich Mkhondo.
We engage with more than 160 people, including journalists, editors, and academics, and perused through 200 documents and drafted a 300-page report from our discussions with all of those people.
If you look at the webinars we've had, around the 4 webinars we've had around those recommendations of the Satchwell report, we are able to kind of channel the discussion around where we want it to go, where we are saying that how do we make sure that at this difficult period and as we move forward, we not only enhance the standard of journalism in South Africa, but also make sure that our journalism is that of the highest ethical standard.
The world is evolving and changing every day. So is the media sector. It is thus important to take stock of new happenings or developments and adapt to these changes. Having the inquiry will make salient the challenges and realities that currently exist.
The important point for us is to make sure that 1, we have an ethical media. 2, we have strong, independent media. Thirdly, we also have very strong community media and community voices. Fourthly, to have a media that is diverse in terms of representation, but more importantly, in terms of language. As we put together our action plan over the next 5 years, I think those are some of the key things that we would have to do, but also to make sure that South Africans in their localities, regardless of their economic stature, they are able to access the news.
Thank you very, very much. In this second half hour of the session, we really want to get into the nuts and bolts of the report by Judge Kathy Satchwell. And what we thought we will do is basically to bring in some of the chairs of those various webinars that we held leading up to the conference so that they can give us highlights of what has emerged from those webinars. If you remember, we basically took those 69 recommendations and we broke them up into 4 key sections, and we wanted to look at what would be possible to do. Some of the recommendations are not necessarily only for SANEF to do, but they also call on civil society, our regulatory bodies, etc., to come in and assist us as part of this journey that we've all taken to improve our journalism and enhance the quality and basically recommit ourselves to ethical journalism. We can still continue the conversation on social media platforms, and it's hashtag ethical journalism. I'm going to be bringing up the chairs of SANEF's various subcommittees as they're the people that led that webinar. Let's start with the highlights from building an ethical framework for South African journalism. This webinar was led by our diversity and media ethics subcommittee chair, Monica Langampasad. Unfortunately, Monica couldn't be with us today because she is celebrating her birthday, and wherever she is, happy birthday, Monica. But she did send us this recording of the highlights from her webinar.
Good day and welcome to the report back from the webinar on media freedom and media diversity. At this webinar, the first speaker of building an ethical framework for South African journalism was veteran journalist and author Rich Mkhondo. He also framed guidelines for practicing journalism as stipulated by Jim Leher. Mkhondo makes use of the guidelines to remind attendees of what it means to perform reputable journalism. As described by Leher, the first principle is to do nothing one cannot defend. The next is to cover right and present every story with care you would want if the story was about you. The third and fourth guideline is to assume that there is at least one side of the equation to every story. Do not use anonymous sources or blind quotes, except on rare and monumental occasions. In visiting these guidelines, Mkhondo takes attendees back to the basic honorable practices in media to remind those at the webinar of functional recommendations to better the climate of South African journalism today. The second speaker of the event was former Press Ombudsman Joe Tlolo. Tlolo provides top-level thought and insight into ethics credibility in South African journalism. The panel tackles problems faced in South African media as a metaphor. If you consider a universe as a large circle, then those committed to good journalism would just be a small dot in that circle. Our goal should be to expand that dot until it is a universe, a large circle. To do so, Tlolo's address begins by tackling recommendations media freedom put forward in the SANEF report. In unpacking the topic of media diversity, Tlolo suggests that 9 surveys and interviews should be implemented for minorities that venture into the media business and the reasons for drawing from the occupation. The final panelist was Anthea Garman. Anthea is the head of School of Journalism and Media Studies. Garman tackles systematic problems facing journalism in South Africa today. Press Ombudsman Joe Media Freedom's recommendations. These recommendations include recommendations A4, which relate to trade unions in the media industry, Trade unions are voluntary associations and journalists are free to start, join, and disassociate from them. Recommendations A6. One must not forget that it is the media house that have the power to enforce the codes amongst their contributors, full-time staff or freelancers. Staffers are tied to the codes by virtue of contributing to a publication that is already a member. SANEF and media owners are to encourage an inside your media campaign, whereby journalists and editors talk with readers, listeners, and viewers in relaxed events coordinated by SANEF. Create a similar campaign aimed at educational establishments such as schools and universities. Individual publications and SANEF should initiate media literacy blogs. This can be structured as media conversations with society. Lobby the Department of Education to include media literacy in their life skills syllabus with an emphasis on tools to avoid fake news, disinformation, and misinformation. The same tools should be investigated by media houses. However, readers, viewers, and listeners should be urged to listen to them. General suggestions included. Areas of diversity that recommendations should focus on are language, gender, class, and the LGBTQI+ community. Training should be focused on the themes of journalism and queer studies that should be offered as academic classes. We should investigate ways to blend academics and community training. As a way of considering education, a mapping exercise should be facilitated by Senate, MDA, and other organizations. Newsrooms are organized by the middle class and a lens of privilege. We need to find ways to talk with majority groups, not as victims, rather as invested members of society. This practice should function from the bottom up. Instead of talking with academics and NGOs, standards should focus on speaking to people in the community, grassroots organization, and social movements. During the conference, someone should give a 10-minute presentation on what multilingualism means in terms of public interest. We should find ways to interrogate the partnerships between the community media and mainstream. We should interrogate the large audiences of big media houses. We should investigate the curriculum of journalism at tertiary institutions to find out if it's still relevant to the current state of the industry and the challenges it is facing. We should find a way to bypass paywalls of newspapers. Are paywalls still within the public interest? The Ombudsman should be part of the Press Council and other external oversight boards, and we should create an ethics chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was the contribution from Monica's webinar. We will be running polls later on so that you can help us decide on what some of those contributions and what those which of those should actually be prioritized so that we can help inform the media ethics 5-year plan, as our chair Bungalwa has suggested too. We're also going to be allowing for more questions and clarifications with the chairs of the subcommittees willing to take those questions. So if you have questions for any of them, please do post them in the chat group and we will be able to attend to them. And I am seeing some of the conversation that is happening in the chat group, and we will come to it at the appropriate time. I now want to call upon our second panelist, Mary Papaya. She is SANEF's chair of Media Freedom Subcommittee, and she is going to be outlining the theme around using media ethics as a tool. Mary?
Good morning, Chair, SG and Program Director, our keynote and all speakers, SANEF Mancom, Council, colleagues and guests. Our speakers in this session on ethics included experts and well-respected leaders in ethics, self-regulation and processes for ethical journalism practices. They were Ms. Sasanda Nkoala from the South African Press Council, Professor Franz Kruger, Adjunct Professor of Journalism at Wits University, and Mr. Aidan White, the founder of the International Ethical Journalism Network. Other participants were news industry leaders, thought leaders on integrity and journalism, academia leaders, media ethic lobbyists, and self-regulated leaders from our newsrooms. Our discussion dwelt in intense detail on a range of best practice approaches and benchmarks to exercise ethical controls inside and outside the newsroom. We debated relevant policies, codes of ethical conduct for journalists, and most importantly, the ecosystem of self-regulation to advance ethical journalism practice. We touched on the practices that govern our media freedom mandate and the constitutional imperatives linked to our self-regulation system. The key recommendations from our discussion, and there were many, but for purpose of expediting resolutions from this here platform, the following were tabled. The first being that all parties in discussion suggested that SANEF supports in principle the recommendations of the Ethics Commission report, which affirm the co-regulation system. We support the call for regulators to consider proposals to implement a universal code to regulate journalism. The second takeaway, we propose the establishment of an annual ethics barometer by an independent body for the media industry to promote ethical reporting and accountability, and that SANEF commits to fundraising for the establishment of such a barometer. Our next recommendation was that we encourage media houses to introduce watertight policies and promote requisite transparency between media practitioners, their newsrooms, and their consumers and other stakeholders. Media houses are also encouraged to strengthen their ethical codes and other internal ethical and editorial controls to exercise best practice and promote public confidence in quality journalism and in journalism as a whole. And lastly, calling on SANEF to commit to working with institutions of higher learning to ensure that tertiary curriculum pays special attention and emphasis on media ethics. Thank you, and back to you, SG.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Mary, for that contribution. And I hope colleagues that, as Brajo says there in the chat, we are really not interested in having another conversation that doesn't take us anywhere. That's why we want to emerge from this conference with a plan of things that need to be done so that there is a way forward that we will be able to hold ourselves accountable to, and not just have another talking point or a report that gathers dust without any way forward. I'm now going to call on our third panelist, Chamano Makadi. He is the subcommittee chair of training and education, and he is going to give us an overview of the technological impact on ethics. Chamano, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mahlatsi. Good afternoon to colleagues, and certainly to the rest of people that are joining us online, mainly the people of South Africa. So it's a great pleasure to come on this platform and share some of the key points that were shared during the third webinar, which focused mainly on the safety of journalists and the training and development. Perhaps maybe let me just begin by just giving a short background, starting with the safety of journalists. At the time, I was in discussion with Africa Check Executive Director Nikiwe Bikitsha. I was also in conversation with Nadine Hoffman, who is the Deputy Director of IWMF. academic from the Tshwane University of Technology, Levindo, was also part of that discussion. Let me just summarize some of the key points or the things they have said in rather during that conversation. The harassment of journalists, amongst other things, include denial of access and invasion of privacy to journalists. Nadine has also gone to the extent of sharing a research which was conducted in 2018. These harassments would also include threatening messages, which will also include death threats. In some cases, private information of journalists will be shared publicly by sources or people who they would have reported on, and probably they just feel unhappy with some of the reports. They were also in agreement that these problems are on the rise, especially here in South Africa. By the time it becomes a physical attack, it would have, in some cases, started online. This is through platforms such as Facebook or Twitter, which are mainly social media platforms. It is therefore important for communities also to have a better understanding of the role of journalists. These were some of the points that were shared by our panelists. I'm just going to share very briefly some of the key points that speaks to the recommendations that we discussed on the day. The first one, under safety of journalists, media houses must ensure continuous safety training for journalists. It is against this, came against the background of the few highlights I've just shared with you. SANEF to provide relevant training and enhancement, enhance content on this portal. So I also know for a fact that there are a number of initiatives currently that are taken by SANEF, and I'm sure this will also be part of the 5-year plan that we are still going to put together. The third one, SANEF to continue engaging relevant institutions, political parties, and civil society organizations to speak out against attacks on journalists. A lot of things were discussed here, which also speaks to some of the things that we have seen recently. And I know that there have also been statements that were made, particularly cautioning political parties or politicians to try and refrain from making some of the statements that undermine the work done by journalists. The fourth one, SANEF to engage international bodies to explore solutions to cyberbullying, targeted especially at female journalists. We have seen a number of our female colleagues that have been targeted, and this came out as well as one of the key points that colleagues during that discussion felt it needs to be taken very seriously. SANEF to work with newsroom management and other interest groups to promote mental health amongst journalists and to facilitate access to relevant access where needed. Again, this is an important issue. I also know for a fact that one of our colleagues, Katie Katapodas, has been leading these issues. And I believe at the right time, we will also be able to continue with some of these issues. The health of journalists are quite important, especially at the time like now, where there's just so much that they've been facing with the pandemic, COVID-19. There's a number of other things that we can talk of, but here specifically, we spoke about the attacks which Nadine, when she summarized to us, especially basing it on the research that was conducted in 2018, we are learning that 30% of some of the female journalists in particular, as a result of some of these attacks, they end up feeling so terribly, such that they even want to leave the profession. And I do hope these are some of the conversations that we will be able to take forward. Now, just moving on as I summarize on the training and development of journalists, the first point, SANEF to support media organizations to continually provide skills for professional development of journalists. A number of initiatives have been going on, and I'm sure there will also be a lot to share, especially on the issues of the guideline that we are also currently developing on COVID-19. The Education and Training Subcommittee, referring to the ENT of SANEF, to ensure that existing newsroom training has adequate provisions for journalists. The third point, SANEF to explore how members can contribute to developing media literacy programs at school level. It was also shared in that discussion that perhaps maybe some of these initiatives must start at school level, where the young ones can also be assisted or taught on these issues. The last point under training and development, SANEF to facilitate training opportunities on race and gender sensitivity reporting and conduct of practitioners. So those were the few points that were shared, and I do hope that with time we should be able to take these matters forward. I agree certainly, Mahlatsi, in what you've just shared with us. Brajo certainly agreed that these cannot just be issues that we discuss at conference level, but something certainly has to be done about it. So with that, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Tamano. Colleagues, just to also say that the Satchwell report doesn't put the responsibility just on SANEF. I think that on this call, we have various partners that can come on board. Just to remind you that we are quite a small organization with great ambitions, but I think the work that we have to do going forward certainly is not just one for SANEF alone, but requires all of our partners and those who share the vision to also come on board. And I think that's how we will be able to move forward. I'm now going to call on Isaac Mina, who's the last member of this panel. Isaac is the chair of Isaac is the chair of our Access to Information and Media Policy Subcommittee, and he's going to be outlining the main takeaways from the Ethics and Sustainability webinar. It is part of that report that we officially launched today and that we have also made available on our website. Isaac, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I think we can immediately get the slides up. One of the takeaways from the Satchwell report is the strong link between universal access to information and news in particular by the citizens of this country and sustainable media, who should make sure that public interest journalism thrive in our country. So as a result of the Satchwell Commission's report and ongoing work on journalism as a public good, our subcommittee commissioned The report that I just also put another link in the chat on media sustainability and universal access to public interest journalism. That was then used within SANEF as a for debate and input, many interviews with SANEF members and others. And at the webinar a week or so ago, we also shared it with a broader group of people, and we got really, really good input at that webinar, but also some input sent to us afterwards. All of those have been considered, and we implemented that as far as possible in the final report that you can now see. So what we propose in a SANEF, since we've debated this, is really that we get broad support for the recommendations in the report. But we also want to invite any of our stakeholders to continue contributing to the discussion based on the input that we've made. And we will certainly use this report to engage further with government, with civil society, with funders, with tech companies, and so on. So we will later on have a poll to get a sense also of what people think about the priorities of that. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to run through the key issues from the report. So the report deals in some depth with media sustainability as a constitutional imperative, why it is necessary that there should be some support in our democracy for freedom of expression and press freedom, and to support media in different ways. And it also boils down to the rights of citizens to information, as I said, journalism in the public interest. For the purposes of this report, we came up with and we called it specifically a working definition of public interest journalism, because we think that we may want to hone and clarify and adjust until we're all comfortable with this definition. But I think this is good for start. Public interest journalism refers to journalistic activity that's central to the democratic function and the protection and promotion of the South African Constitution, including investigative journalism, reporting on daily affairs of public institutions, and local journalism focused on the generation of public interest stories in towns and villages and underserved rural areas. You will see in the report that we've been looking at similar definitions of public interest journalism in other parts of the world. So from here, let's now look at policy options in support of media sustainability. Essentially, on the next slide, we will see the first of a number of key policy options. Can we go to the next slide, please? About the establishment of a media sustainability fund to support, promote, and strengthen public interest journalism. And really to support a defined set of programs and projects, to also support ethics, sustainability. We recognize, and we've looked at examples of this elsewhere in the world, that the recipients of funds should be shielded from donor pressure and undue influence. Some of the issues that came up at the webinar was about the possible overlaps between what we propose here in the MDDA. In the report, we set out that we think the Media Sustainability Fund should have a much broader focus at the MDDA, but that there's also good possibilities of some collaboration. Next slide. This is about the zero rating of public interest news. Essentially, we have, and I've just a few minutes ago put a link in the chat about an earlier report that SANEF and MMA and others did about how important it is for universal access to the internet, and then particularly also to to news websites. So you can go and have a look on the first point on universal internet access, but then the second logical step would be to advocate for zero rating of public interest news. We also think that the SABC as a public service or a public news service could take hands with SANEF and looking at ways to to zero rate both public service news and the broader range of public interest news by all news outlets. Next. The next point is really about the relationship between media and the tech platforms, Google and Facebook and so on. We've realized also from Harry Duckmore's research, and I should say that we give acknowledgement to a lot of the really good input into this report to Harry, to his report that was recently published. If you haven't looked at it, please do so. But he made the recommendation that the only way that we in South Africa can really stand up to the tech platforms and be in a negotiating position that we can achieve something is to take an Africa-wide approach. I think if you look at what happened over the past few days about privacy issue and WhatsApp and the steps that the information regulator took in conjunction with a range of organizations on the continent, and also trying to make the point that the South African internet governance regime would be similar to the same regime in the EU, and that EU standards and norms should rather be applied in South Africa and many other African countries. I think that is already a good approach if you look at some of the rules that the EU have implemented to regulate the relationship between the tech platforms and media to try and make sure there's good media sustainability. In the report, we look also at the Australian and the US examples. So there's lots of international good practice that we can draw on. There's also a recommendation that we work with a competition commission, meaning making recommendations on their efforts to foster competition in the digital economy. So that would be one of the issues that SANEF will pursue. Next. A next section of recommendations all deal with tax relief and a variety of state support schemes. So it ranges from fairer taxations of profits that's made for local advertising, looking at ways in which tax exemptions can be implemented as a relief for media organizations providing public interest journalism, tax deductions for businesses, donors and so on who support local journalism, and and possibly some direct or indirect subsidies to promote and facilitate the production and dissemination of quality news and encourage media diversity. Next. So we say that we should also looking at our industry itself and looking at alternative income generating models. One of that would be the tiering of or access tiering of memberships and subscriptions offerings to try and make sure that the broader audience can be reached. Looking at new business models and innovation in the industry. And particularly at some not-for-profit and social enterprise models, and then the relationship between these kinds of systems and the Media Sustainability Fund. There were really good proposals that came from the webinar about sharing of public interest journalism content, and we've added, based on some of that input, some of the recommendations, essentially that two possible wire services could be considered. One would simply be to distribute public interest content far and wide, produced by any media organization, used by any media organization, but then also the possibility of better utilization of community media, possibly on a paid-for basis by bigger media houses in support of community media, meaning to capacitate community media to produce better content that can be utilized across the spectrum. And then this is the last set of recommendations about support for fellowships, learnerships, internships, again, with some help from the Media Sustainability Fund and with government money, and better utilization of some of the CETA money and coordination of these efforts within the journalism industry. That is, and that would also extend to professional development and mid-career upskilling. And the last point is about a much bigger effort about media and information literacy initiatives. I've seen some suggestions from Terry and William and others on the chat. I think there's really room here to form a separate team to start looking at how we can all take hands, different organizations, to promote media and information literacy from school level, and as a way to broaden the audiences of news media. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Isaac. And I love the conversation that is happening in the chat group and overall support for some of those recommendations. And Gwen asks a very good question around discussing timeframes and what is achievable in the short and medium terms, especially given that the industry is going through the pain right now. If there are any particular questions, a lot of what I'm seeing in the comments have been, in the chat box have been comments. If there are any particular questions to the panelists, please do type them in there. But the team is now going to help us with a poll that just helps us in terms of determining what should be priorities that we take forward. Again, to emphasize that, you know, not everything can be done by SANEF, but we are hoping that we can start partnerships with various civil society bodies and many other partners, activists, so that we can actually see this work going forward. So the first poll that is up is around media freedom and diversity, and we're asking which of the following recommendations from the inquiry report and webinar discussions should SANEF prioritize? Choose one, provide a platform for various media organizations to collaborate to protect media freedom, to support newsroom managers to uphold editorial independence, to lobby for news in African languages and accessible to our diverse population. please do go ahead and click there, and then we will have the outcomes of the poll later on, and we will be able to share them with you. Can we go to the second poll? If when we are done with this one, just give me guidance on when to go there. Okay, while we're doing that, let me maybe get Isaac to answer Dimitri's question. He's asking, are the proposals about the funding for media diversity and sustainability that it comes from a single source, government, or that there are more than one, there's more than one source? Isaac?
The idea, let me use the example of a recent development in our political sphere with the party funding legislation, where a fund has been established where anybody, from individuals to corporates, whoever wants to contribute to multi-party democracy, can contribute to that fund, which is administered by the IEC and then distributed in a non-partial way. So the idea would really be that we establish a fund that can receive money from any institution, and that would then prioritize all the different options for distributing the funds, such as strengthening the regulatory bodies, training of journalists, supporting media innovation, developing and researching R&D on new ways of funding media, cooperating. For instance, one of the issues that was raised at the webinar was also, shouldn't there be some or other way that Joe Public can subscribe to a range of media organizations, to try and get media organizations together, so that you don't have a subscription here and there and have 10 in the end, but rather have some way of collaboration for media access. And in the process, just to touch on the MDDA, we think there could be good collaboration, even though the MDDA focus is much more on community media. But we would like to really engage more with experts like Dimitri and others, who's been working on this kind of thing for yonks, to try and sharpen and develop and hone these proposals. I also want to make reference to critique, very good critique that Reg Ramney sent to us in the last few days, and it would be great if Reg can also give some input on his views, also based on the fact that he has previously put together a really good report a year ago on the impact of COVID on the media. Thanks.
I will allow Reg to come in, but I thought while we do that, can we have the second poll coming up? It's around media ethics. Which of the following recommendations from the inquiry report and webinar discussion should SANEF prioritize? Promoting universal code to regulate journalism. This is one of the key recommendations, of course, that came from the Satchwell report. Establishment of an annual ethics barometer by an independent body. Encourage media houses to introduce policies that promote transparency with audiences. Encourage media houses to strengthen their ethics and work with institutions of higher learning to ensure ethics in tertiary curriculum. While we take the poll there, I don't know if Terry, you wanted to come in and add to that conversation, as Isaac was referring there to the work that you did in terms of the impact of COVID on media institutions?
Right. Look, so the point I wanted to make was that the recommendations on funding really are, in economic terms, a market intervention. There is a media market in South Africa, so whatever we do, we should be quite careful. First of all, not to preserve that which is dying, and I think print is definitely, if not completely on the way out, is certainly quite imperiled, and not to maintain the status quo. So we have to be very careful about how we can encourage new innovation and support that which deserves supporting. So if we think of innovation, one of the innovations would be a new SAPA, for instance. That would be fantastic, and that would serve everybody. But we could, and this applies to funding, whether it's done through a media fund or from government. We just have to be very careful about how it's done. And I had some observations in the document I sent to Isaac, and I'm happy to help on refining the fund as well. The other thing is that we have to be careful about what public interest journalism is. I think it might be broader than just investigative journalism and covering institutions, public and private. I think we need to do a bit of thinking about that. So yeah, okay.
Thank you very much, Rach. There, I see there was support for the idea of a SAPA-like coming back, but we do know that we've seen media owners withdrawing from their own organization, and the funding of that would definitely be quite an interesting one. If we could bring up the third poll, while I just look through some of the questions that are emerging there so that I can have my colleagues come in. And this one relates to the safety and security for journalists. Which of the following recommendations from the report should SANEF prioritize? Work to ensure continuous safety training for journalists, provide relevant training resource and opportunities on its portal, engage relevant institutions, political parties, and civil society organizations to speak out against attacks on journalists, engage international bodies to explore solutions to cyberbullying targeted especially at female journalists, and work with newsroom managers to promote mental health. On that one, on mental health, I saw that in the Q&A session, there was quite a very strong support for work to be done around mental health. And as Tamano was indicating there, SANEF has actually started the work to ensure that we support journalists. It was, I think, Sazizo Dlamini who said, I like the inclusion of mental health support for journalists. We're really facing traumas in this world. Mental health support is essential. We're hopefully going to be rolling out our program towards supporting journalists. And also just to add that the first webinar that we had, the participation was quite low, and that made us realize that we should also do a lot more work in raising awareness amongst journalists and making sure that we support them and encourage them to seek help. Gwen in the chat says, poll options with encourage could mean anything. What in concrete terms could or should SANEF do? Also, the set of options assume, I don't know, Gwen, do you want to come in there and just explain for me? I'm not following your contribution there.
Yeah, sure. The set of options assumes that the only place where this is going to happen is in higher education. And following on from what Marinette and various other people have said, of course, this excludes grassroots journalists, it excludes non-graduate entrants to the profession. All of these people are extremely important. They're important to community radio, they're important to online information. So I think, that option actually needs to not just be about universities. Of course, it should include universities, but it can't just be about them.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that is noted. I wanted to go to Marinette's contribution because I saw it earlier and it was focused on languages. Marinette, do you want to come in there? I've lost that, your contribution from earlier.
Yes, thank you, Mkhondo. It was about the lack of diversity and especially the access in more languages and the talk about the importance of local journalism. I think the question that we talked about last year should be on the table again, and that's the question of paid internships, because otherwise the media is going to become a very middle class journalism. It's going to become more and more a middle class activity because young people can't afford to either not work or work for free anymore. So I think if we want to encourage diversity, because diversity in sourcing and diversity in stories starts with diversity in the newsroom. And I'm a little worried about that.
Yeah. Right. Thank you very much, Marinette. I think that is very much noted. And yeah, and I don't know, Chamano, if you wanted to come in just in terms of some of the work that we started working on, especially around paid internships and the partnerships that we've started.
No, thank you so much, Mkhondo. I think what is quite clear is that everyone is sort of going through really, really, tough times. Companies that used to employ, rather place, you can name it. I mean, in some cases, 60 interns, nationwide. I mean, I always make reference to, the SABC a few years back. They would take about 60 interns, across all provinces. Your ENCA 12 at a go for about 12 months. All of these companies today, they are not able to do what they used to back then. But what Marinette is saying is quite important, that editors as well, despite all the challenges that are there, they also, to a certain extent, think of what can be done to assist, young journalists. So in terms of the initiatives that we have been, trying to make, there are a number of role players that we've been trying to collaborate with to try and assist students, whether at college and universities, through community media as well as mainstream media. So on the side of SANEF, yes, there are other initiatives, especially at ENT. We will be rolling out an internship, which is about, I think it will take about 30 of them, with 10 different hosts, 3 per media house. But I'm sure you would also understand that that is really just a drop in the ocean. Obviously, there are many of them that need that kind of assistance, and certainly it will be appreciated if other colleagues can also open up their doors and assist where possible. So thank you so much, Mkhondo.
All right. If we could bring up the third poll, or is it the fourth? My number in the has disappeared. Okay, and this one is basically around training and development, and I think it speaks to the issues that Tamano, Marinette, and Gwen have all been raising around provide a platform for various media organizations to collaborate to protect media freedom, to support newsroom managers, to uphold editorial independence, engage relevant institutions, political parties, and civil society organizations to speak out against attacks on journalists, engage international bodies to explore solutions to cyberbullying targeted, especially at female journalists, work with newsroom managers to promote mental health. The one point that I wanted to talk to in particular was this one on engaging relevant institutions in terms of speaking out against attacks on journalists, because one of the most frustrating things that we've noted over the years is that, SANEF and maybe Media Monitoring Africa have really become the lone voices in speaking out against attacks on journalists. And that has basically made this conflict just one around, the journalists, the media industry versus politicians or, those in communities that are attacking our journalists. And how do we move that conversation so that we have other role players also taking up this responsibility of speaking out when journalists are being attacked? I think I would like to hear a lot of, if there are ideas on how do we take this forward to make sure that it becomes a societal conversation and one where we have society condemning such acts and speaking out when journalists are being attacked, especially by politicians. And obviously, as we go towards local government elections, we worry that we will see an increase in this. Just the final poll. Oh, we've had that poll already, sorry. Can we have the final poll? And this one is around sustainability. Champion the establishment of a media sustainability fund, promote access to public interest news sites, foster competition in the digital economy, and explore tax relief and other state support mechanisms as per research. I'm going to be handing over to my colleague, Nwabisa Makunga, who is going to be taking us through that final plan that we want to emerge with going forward. And we're really looking forward to your contributions around what that final plan should talk to. I loved Marinette asking us around aspiring journalists and journalists in training. I think we would love to hear a lot of younger journalists as well, just to contribute to this conversation in terms of, because, we have to leave the industry in a healthier space, and we need their contributions and their ideas on how we actually do take it forward. I will now be handing over to my colleague, Nwabisa Makunga, who is the editor-in-chief of the Sowetan and also the Treasurer General of SANEF. Nwabisa?
Thank you very much, Mahlatse. Good afternoon, colleagues. And thank you very much for joining us for this very important conversation. So what I'll do in this session is really try and get a lot of engagement going. I see the poll has obviously run. So we'll do the results of that poll. And then we'll really get into the debate about some of the issues. I love the conversations that are already happening on the chat. So first up, I think before we actually call out my slides, I'd like the team to put up the results of the poll so we can just quickly go through those. Right, so first one basically dealing with promotion of the Universal Code to regulate journalism. I see that they got 51%, which suggests that it's something that a lot of you are wanting SANEF to prioritize. I think we've probably noted that. The second one being the establishment of the annual ethics barometer, which is something that we thought was quite important. I see 41% of people actually support that idea. And encouraging media houses to introduce policies that promote transparency with audiences. 43% of you agree that should happen and should be prioritized, and encouraging media houses to strengthen, ethics. I probably think that there's a lot of clarity, perhaps, that is needed there. I did note earlier that Gwen was suggesting, perhaps asking the question about what do we mean by encourage? And perhaps it's something that we probably need to explore. And below that is obviously working with institutions of higher learning to ensure that ethics are prioritized in tertiary curriculum. Again, there's been conversation obviously, around that as well. And I think we take the point that Gwen was making about not only making it, an issue of higher learning in tertiary institutions. Can we go to the next one? So the big one, I think, here, quite interesting, is that a lot of people are wanting SANEF to provide a platform for various media organizations to collaborate to protect media freedom. That's something I think we need to discuss further, hopefully here, on practical steps of basically how to do that. And to lobby for news in African language is very, very important, as it was discussed earlier on this conversation. And to support newsroom managers, we do think actually this is quite important, to support newsroom managers to uphold editorial independence. It often comes up as a major talking point, particularly if we're talking, issues of interference, etc. How do we then support media managers, newsroom managers, to actually uphold principles of independence? Can we call up the next one, please? And there you have it. Two big ones I see. Bottom one is, a lot of people are saying we should probably work with newsroom managers to promote mental health. It most definitely is, quite a pertinent issue, and I know a lot of work, and Katie has been leading that work as far as ManCom is concerned, to promote mental health among journalists, to engage with relevant institutions, political parties, and civil society, to speak out against attacks on journalists. Also, increasingly an important one that we should actually be working on and prioritize. And then I think you see that, the others to work to ensure that we work continually to work towards the safety of journalists. We're doing training, etc. Those are quite important. Can we call up the next, Paul? There you go. As far as sustainability, I think most people probably agree that we need to champion the establishment of the Media Sustainability Fund. There's been obviously a lot of discussion around what that fund must do, what it should look like, and really defining what public interest journalism is. That I see on the chat, there's been a lot of conversation around that. Promoting access to public interest news sites, obviously an important one. Exploring tax relief and other state support mechanisms, as the research, which I think is out today, is showing. Please have a look at that and really see how we can make a very formidable business case for the media to be supported in that regard, without obviously compromising our integrity also in the process. So thank you so much. Those are basically the results of the poll. I think that they kind of give us a good idea of what colleagues, at least on this call, feel that SANEF should prioritize. I'd like to call up the slides again, and that we can go through the conversation. So in essence, we all know that we've had the conversations, different webinars, and you've seen what is really being asked, what a lot of the suggestions that have been made. Please go to the next slide. A lot of the suggestions that have been made. And so we kind of put everything in a 5-point sort of plan, so to speak, if we want to steal from government's kind of usage of language. And the first one is around ethics. And so what I'm going to do, colleagues, I'll just read through all these points, on the one slide, and then I'm going to call up the conversation. And if you may, please put your hand. I'll try and see, who puts their hands up, and then we'll call you to perhaps make your point. So around ethics, we've already said that SANEF supports in principle the recommendations of the ethics report, which affirm co-regulation. And we also support the call for regulators to consider proposals to implement a universal code to regulate journalism. And I think the important part perhaps to make here was there was one very important call that was made in one of the webinars. And it was really to say, should the regulatory bodies put forward or strengthen their teeth, as it were, and should they perhaps, I see somebody saying that the slide is blurry. Please, can we try and clarify that? Should they perhaps, encourage more, punitive measures particularly for repeat offenders, in journalism? And we debated it, obviously, and we felt that was something probably entirely for the regulatory bodies to explore. And I think from a SANEF point of view, we are affirming, the system that we have, and we're throwing it to them to say this is essentially, their role to come up with what they believe is an important way to deal with repeat offenders, so to speak, in the industry, and how they do that is something that we can obviously engage with them on. Second one being the proposal to establish an annual barometer, ethics barometer. I think we've heard much about that. We also encourage media houses to introduce policies to promote transparency between media practitioners. Media houses are also encouraged to strengthen the ethics code and editorial controls, something that I think is really, really important. And then obviously we are committing to work with everybody, all bodies that we need to work with to ensure that we pay special attention to issues of ethics. And I just want to call perhaps a conversation and hear inputs from colleagues as far as this is concerned. And I would like to encourage you to perhaps put your hand up. I see. You want to go ahead? Yes.
Yeah, sorry, my question was, if journalism is an art or a skill, a value, public service, that is not only the preserve of those who write, but also those who read and use it to inform themselves. Who are these publics that we will engage with? Is it that we will go and call on them when we need them, or what is the relationship? Because I've been in my lifetime been through very enthusiastic responses and neglect. It's like a marriage, that you fall in love and then you leave them when you don't need them. So who are these publics that we will be reaching, and how will we reach them more consistently?
Thank you very much for that question. Perhaps Mahlatse or Sbu, do we want to respond to that?
Could you please just repeat the question for me? I've got a poor signal here, Novisa. Thank you.
So the question is really, if we are talking about engaging with the public, I think he probably wants to understand who is the public that we are talking about. So do we have specific sectors in mind? How do we define really the public, and what kind of channels would we be using to actually engage with those people as far as the decision-making processes that we want to embark on?
I think
how consistent will the relationship be?
Thank you, Hassan. I think you can go ahead.
I think from my side, I mean, the media and the content that we produce is consumed by the general public, and also I think by the public, it's also in reference to all sectors of society, be it media commentators, be it civil society, but more importantly, be it the audiences that consume the media. I think they should not be, there's nothing stopping us also as part of popularizing the work that we do, either as SANEF, but also developments in the media, to actually inform the public in general using our various platforms about what we intend doing. So I think when we speak of the public, we actually are referring to making sure that there is a greater outreach as much as possible. Thanks, Novis.
Thank you very much, Sbu. Before I move on to the next slide, I think this issue of ethics is obviously quite an important one. There was an indication around either having the barometer and having SANEF supported, and I'd really like to hear the conversations perhaps on the chat or colleagues here on how that people believe may actually assist us in trying to foster, accountability in the most practical of ways.
There we go. I think in this regard, we should be thinking also about journalists or so-called journalists who continually breach every code that exists, and whether this might not be an opportunity or some means of sanction by naming and shaming those who have really got out of control. I really think we have to think about this because we are having to deal with a number of people who call themselves journalists and in fact are completely tarnishing the whole image of journalism. We might also perhaps think through the Press Council, perhaps of press cards and withdrawing the official recognition to those who continually breach the codes of conduct, or hopefully we'll have a universal code of conduct.
Nobisa, just to say, Themba Sputukela also had a view on this, and I had said that he can come in. I don't know if he's still on the call. He had raised it in the question and answer, and maybe, Themba, if you're there, you might want to contribute at this point.
That's fine. I think, Terry, we've noted. I think, Terry, we've noted your very interesting, contribution in that regard. And I know it's a matter of huge debate, not only in SANEF in particular, but also just the industry as a whole. But I think it's something obviously worth discussing and exploring further. If they're not hands as far as the issue of ethics is concerned.
Right, Joe and Dimitri have their hands up.
Oh, super. Prajo, do you want to come through?
The question of recidivism has always plagued the Press Council. The one is that if you look at publications, you will find that a publication will be found to have not given a subject of a story a chance to reply, and it then acts in terms of the ruling of the Press Council. But 6 months down the line, it is again found guilty of the same thing. Now, it's not the same people involved in that publication who are in that situation. So it becomes difficult to call this a repeat offense. The closest we've gotten to defining it is to say that if a publication has offended by publishing the wrong facts, and then again publishes the same facts after a ruling by the Press Council, then we can accuse it of being a repeat offender. But otherwise, every publication is found guilty of the same offenses all the time. So a line has to be defined very clearly. What do we mean by repeat offenses? And we cannot define ourselves in terms of saying people need to have press cards to practice as journalists. That would be licensing journalism. Journalism is everybody's right in terms of our constitution. You can't take it away from anybody. You can't give it to anybody. Everybody has the right to freedom of expression. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Prajo. I see Dimitri has a hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Good morning. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for a wonderful, wonderful conference today. My question goes to who is it that we are actually are we looking at the individual journalist? Are we looking at the media house? Because it seems to me that this is something that we could apply our minds a little bit more and think this through a bit more. And then if it's the media house, is it the editor? Or is it the owners, the management? So for me, that part of making this decision about keeping ourselves accountable and really goes to who exactly is the focus. I think that that's certainly something that I really believe would help us to move forward here. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Dimitri. I think that's quite an important point because it always comes up, in conversation to say who gets to be held accountable. Yes, you've got a byline, But that byline and that story there, although it's under somebody's byline, but it actually is the work of a whole system of people. So who then ought to take responsibility, for that. Manhlatse, please help me out. Do I have any more hands? I don't see any. No. Colleagues, I think let's go to the next slide, which is.
I don't see any. I think though, perhaps, Nobisa, just to add to what Gwen was saying there around this issue of sanctions of journalists, because it seems to be quite a heated one. She's saying that press cards or withdrawal of plays right into the hands of a government that would love to see licensed journalists and SANEF as policemen. We have to name and shame, but this could be a very dangerous step. And I thought maybe in the chat just to say that, Gwen, one of the things we thought that the barometer could do is basically obviously give an overview annually of what were the editorial lapses that happened given the decisions of the of the Ombud and also of the BCCSA. And that could be one way of naming and shaming, using the words in inverted commas, and also part of that process of holding us accountable. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
I'm told that Mary's hand is up. Mary, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thanks. I think on the discussion on the barometer was also in line with the press index releases that we have quite regularly, and we felt that this would be a right fit to have the barometer, and as the SG mentioned, it will look to all of those established and factual findings that we could have an independent company come and establish. And then just pointing to the issue of the media houses encouraging to strengthen their ethical codes. The one thing that came up, and we had input from one of the media organizations that have their internal ombudsman. So that was an option that was put forward there. And the issue was how they worked. So there is practice around that in existing media entities as well, just on that point. Thank you so much, Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mary. Simon, I see your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Thanks. I couldn't unmute myself. Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is the idea of a universal code is I think could be fairly straightforward, but the problem is always going to arise in how that code is regulated and how sanctions are applied. This is something that I think would have been interesting to speak to Alan Rusbridger about this morning. You know, why the Guardian didn't join the independent press organization IPSO after that. You're talking about the phone hacking scandal and what came out of that and the Leveson inquiry, and then they scrapped their press regulator and they set up a new one. But a lot of media houses didn't join it because they didn't feel that its recommendations or its code went far enough in addressing some of the problems in the media. So then there was an alternative organization set up, Impress, and they, well, none of the mainstream newspapers joined that, but a lot of local community newspapers did. Well, sorry, and the Guardian never didn't join either. They set up their own people, but or their internal body. But that's really the question: is if this is about building trust in the media and showing people that actually there are media outlets that can be trusted to behave ethically and to behave responsibly. Well, you know, we can have as many codes and conditions and clauses as we like, but unless we're able to enforce that code and sanction breaches of that code, well, that's not really going to go anywhere towards building this trust.
So is your point then, Simon, that ultimately, even if we do have a code, ultimately it is something that everybody should not only sort of adhere by, but actually be quite compelled to do so?
Well, my question is, how do you do that? How do you compel people to, we talked, there's been lots of mentions of education in newsrooms and higher education, journalism students, etc. But, how much of our ethical lapses that we've had in this country have been as a result of ignorance or negligence, and how many have been because, well, the people who are committing those lapses, those breaches, they know full well what the code says. Someone else mentioned that in the chat, but their breaches are willful, and no amount of education is going to change that. So you have to have regulation, but how? How do you have that on a nationwide scale? Bring everyone in under the banner of that universal code and say, okay, you need to sign up to, well, you can't force people to sign up to it, but it's great to have a universal code that people can voluntarily sign up to. But then it all revolves around the question of how do you enforce that code?
I think that's a good question, definitely, and particularly obviously relevant here because not all of us in this industry actually adhere to the code or subscribe to the code, which in itself is a problem. Colleagues, we do have to move on to other slides. I'd like us to do that. I don't see any hands at this moment for there is one again that just came up. I can't see it. I can't see who it is. No, please assist
it's
me.
Terry. It's Terry.
Is it Terry? Do you want to come through?
Okay, you can go ahead. I was just thinking in terms of if we had a reliable barometer that the public at large accepted as being an honest judge of what is going on, that would be, it's not a question of naming and shaming. They would be able to look at that and say, right, this media has done this, this, and this. They were asked to amend or correct and they refused. So it becomes the barometer that is run independently, but which can give the public at large, the reading public, the listening, the viewing public at large, an idea of what is reliable and what is not. In order to do so, we have to have a truly independent and honest barometer.
Thank you very much, Terry, for that contribution. Colleagues, the next set of recommendations is obviously around media freedom and diversity, which says that SANEF undertakes to provide a platform for various media organizations to collaborate and strengthen relations to protect media freedom. I think a lot of that is already being done. The question is, how do we make necessary interventions where necessary to be able to do that. We also pledge to support newsroom managers to uphold editorial independence, as well as to lobby for news in African languages and which are accessible to our diverse population. May I please invite inputs as far as this slide and these issues are concerned? There we go.
Okay. The last bullet on this slide, to lobby for news in African languages. We are moving into very slippery territory here. So many publications in the indigenous languages have collapsed because people no longer read or listen in their languages. And this is a market issue rather than something that SANEF should waste its time lobbying for. I mean, you walk in any township, you will find that very few people speak in indigenous languages or can read or understand the indigenous languages. Our only ability to influence this would be via the SABC, which I believe is the only organization that is doing a decent job by providing news in those languages. So we're moving into very slippery territory here.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Isn't there a question, though, to be asked about, and perhaps this is what SANEF was trying to spark debate about, accessibility of news to, diverse groups of people. And one of the most expressive way, I suppose, of doing that would be to provide news in the languages that people speak. And so while I hear the point that Pajo is making around, that there are people who are no longer necessarily, consuming news or any information in their own languages, but there is also an argument that has been made about the fact that South African media is quite elitist, perhaps, and very much not accessible to people in the language, to many people in their languages that they want. But I wanna bring, I see before Terry, I actually wanted to bring Reg in, if you don't mind.
So if you don't mind, can I just also just add to what you're saying in response to Pajo?
Sure.
I think we cannot negate the fact that the majority or the dominant language in our media is English and Afrikaans, and there is a greater majority of people in this country who do not speak both languages. And I think if you look at Reg's research, actually, which looked at the audience uptick on SABC of the isiZulu and isiXhosa bulletins by between 40 and I think 60% respectively over the March to June period. That shows you that there is a need, or rather a hunger, for credible news in the languages that the communities speak. I don't think that the fact that some publications or some African language publications have failed should actually be the reason, should be our starting point, rather. I mean, there are a number of publications, actually online and digital publications, that are in isiZulu and isiXhosa that have been launched. I know of some in KwaZulu-Natal. In fact, Slindile Kanyile has launched a business-related news site in isiZulu, and I know some former colleagues of mine from Independent have also launched a sports site. So I think it's important for SANEF, especially if we understand, or if we talk about our role in democracy, to actually promote the use or the promotion of African languages. And also organizations, be they small or even new entrants, who are in that space, as opposed to trying to push your established companies to go that route. I think this situation and where we are currently, our current situation with the destruction that has been caused by COVID-19, it gives us an opportunity to kind of reflect. And given the fact that some of these new publications or news sites came on board over this period, it may be worth looking into actually supporting new entrants, particularly those who are coming in promoting African languages. Thank you, Maurice.
Sure, thank you very much, Chair. I want to bring in a couple of people in this order. I want to bring in Reg. I think you make a interesting point about how African languages should go beyond news. And then I want to bring in Wandile. And then we'll take it from there. Reg, do you want to come in and make your contribution?
Yes. Look, from my point of view, what is interesting to me is the lack of literary publications in African languages, given the potential size of the audience, and thinking about how the Afrikaans community grew in political stature through cultural coming together, through books and through literature. So I think it really needs a bigger push from government and from various other people to recognize the importance of publishing, of the written language, as well as news, broadcast news. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are not literate or not very literate. And for them, broadcasting, radio particularly, is important. We need to support that. The online, I don't see how, online, well, we can support online news, and definitely any innovative venture that wants to run news in any African languages, that is something to possibly be supported through a fund. And it's a very interesting idea. But I do think that we need a much bigger push, nationally for the importance of African languages.
Thank you very much, Rich. Wara, I see you saying you disagree with Bajo.
I know I do totally, but I think what I said, what Smu said, I mean, he's already mentioned my sentiments, I mean, just to add a little bit, if you look at community media, in its essence, you find that close to 75% of it is in vernacular, and the good thing about it is that it's fully representative of all the languages in the country, and also other languages that are international as well, from Chinese to Amharic, and that's part of what a community is. It's not just a community based on geographic area, but it's also a community based on the needs of the particular people, whether it's LHDP or disabled people, and so I mean the importance of language, I mean, the language itself is the essence of culture, and the growth of any community depends on the culture and the language that they possess, and if you look at historically, and how the African news were the first. Were one of the first publications around the country, to be fully capitalized and well read, from Zimu Zabantu to the rest, and that has continued. I mean, with the dispensation of democracy, we've seen close to over 200 new community newspapers, and most of them were language based. What is important, I think, is that instead of just looking at media and essence of journalism, in terms of what the mainstream provides, I think what SANEF is trying to do is important to give a serious microscope to the whole of the industry in essence, because I've seen people saying generalized views like things like we need to improve the content of community media, we need to do this with the community media, without actually looking at what it is, this community media, and what is it doing, and how is it, why is it still alive after so many years without being capitalized, and why is it relevant, and what is this relevance, and I think those are important things, because it's functional, it's there, it exists in those communities. You can't tell me not serving something to those communities, and it's not just only serving. It's not only just serving news, but it's also serving archiving of the history of that community. It's also serving people to become educated as people read in their own languages, and you can't put that for any promotion of any country in the world. So I mean, that's
absolutely agree. I agree. Thank you very much. Well, I just want to bring in two people, colleagues. I'm also mindful of time. I want to bring in two people in this. Professor Glenda, who's going to come in, and then Junisani, I see, had a hand up. Glenda, do you want to come in?
Thank you so much for that, giving me the chance to talk. Vis-a-vis diversity and ethics, the most important thing is to go and deconstruct it or unpack, as we say in journalism, in the newsrooms itself. And for that, we need the assistance of the media companies. SANEF can't do everything overnight. This whole thing is a process to make our world a perfect place, as Judge Ngwepe was talking about. So that's the number one thing. We need support from our partners, like, for instance, MMA, etc., the Press Council, to actually have access to the newsroom so that we can popularize the ethics code, as well as the issue of language, as well as if we're thinking about starting a SAPA again, then there's the opportunity to translate into African languages. So it's not just, also not just starting in English and translating into African languages, but there's a new opportunity there if we're serious about reinstating SAPA. And then in our webinar itself, when we discussed the issue of diversity, we also discussed that it's absolutely important to support the SABC, which is the biggest news organization in this country in terms of African languages, because, you know, some of that's been going down. They've been cutting out African languages, and, you know, not just the radio aspect, but in every other aspect, and to support community media also in relation to language. So it's not something that SANEF can do overnight, but it's something that SANEF can put up high on its agenda towards the ideals that we uphold, and then also to get in partnerships to go into newsrooms with the buy-in of the media companies, because editors also and news editors also can't do everything on their own. So we need these alliances to push forward with these ideals, as I call them, and also actionable items, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenda Dunisani.
Okay. No, thanks very much. I beg to differ with Ubraju. Although it is Boo and Wara, the rest, I mean, most of the point that I wanted to raise. I think, I mean, the issue of one size fits all, I mean, does not work in media, because Braju is making his point referring to the national papers. But when you come to the community paper, I mean, here in the Popo, we've got a newspaper called Spoon. It's over 23, nearly 25 years in running, and it's still running, and it's running very strong. I mean, I, for one, I publish, I mean, my newspaper is 100% Tsonga. And like now we start to see Parliament, when they do the notices, they're sending those notices to us in African languages. I mean, I was approached by, is it Northwest University, that they want us to partner, they want to develop something related to I mean, the languages. So I think, I mean, SANEF, I mean, it's a right direction that they're taking. I think for now, as a short term, they can try to strengthen the publication that are existing, I mean, in African languages. Well, instead of going to start from scratch and lobby for SABC, I mean, I will propose them, let them try to start, I mean, in the ground and see maybe 1 or 2 publication or radio station and see how far it can go. But I mean, African languages, I mean, people, there are still people, I mean, that are reading, I mean, African languages. I mean, we don't have yet, I mean, a conclusive research that say, I mean, people, I mean, in rural areas, they don't read these African languages. I mean, we can go even look in the statistics. I mean, the level of education, I mean, is there in those reports. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dunisani. Colleagues, I think, yes, I want to move on from this, but I think in fairness, I see Prajo's hand is up, and I think in fairness, I just want to call him in. Perhaps there's something you may want to respond to, Prajo.
Madam Chair, I think in my ideal world, this webinar would be done in Setswana. But you know, that's not it. We're not in the ideal world. Now, my argument is that this bullet point takes SANEF into different territory, the territory of marketing and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Our major concern at this point is the ethics in our newsrooms. So the effort we would be putting into lobbying for news in African languages is better used by lobbying for better journalism. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Prajo. Point well taken. Colleagues, may I move to the next slide?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, it's better.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to. I'm listening to different inputs that have been made, and particularly in reference to what Prajo had indicated about African languages. And I also hear him in his last point that the effort should go to high quality journalism versus what we are talking about in terms of African languages. I don't think the 2 points are inseparably in my case. Because if you're going to talk about proficiency levels in terms of languages, that also talks to resource availability for newsrooms, particularly a newsroom like the SABC, that carries a responsibility in terms of the principle of universal access, which means, in addition to other aspects, accessibility in terms of the languages that the different communities speak, and also in terms of our responsibility towards development and preservation of African languages. So if the focus is going to be on one and not the other, it becomes a problem for us because we still need people who are proficient in the languages to be able to deliver the work that we are mandated to deliver. So it talks to the quality of both the written and the spoken aspect of the of the languages. But the other part is something that we tend to ignore, that while we invest a disproportionate amount of resources servicing English audiences, those audiences are still small. But if you look at the presentation of the news content across the country in terms of media, it comes out in English, whereas the heavy and long consumption of news content still sits in African languages, whether you look at radio or you look at television. And there was an example that was made here about the isiZulu and isiXhosa bulletins that Reg researched sometime last year. So so for us, it's also an issue that needs to be dealt with at the training level, where journalists go for their skills development and training, because they come out using English as a baseline for news coverage. And yet we are still expected, to what Roger was saying, we still expected to have content in news and current affairs produced originally in the languages, because you can think of the levels of mediation that take place if the script comes in English, then gets mediated by someone else, and then someone else on the desk who has not even seen what happened on the scene. So the quality of the story, by the time it gets to the right audience in terms of language specificity, is not exactly what came out in English. So there are several layers where we need the issue addressed. But my point is, this is a societal issue. I don't think newsrooms alone or SANEF alone would be able to deal with this. I think there's a national conversation that we need to have as to how we not only think of preserving the right quality of journalism, but think of the inputs that have to go in to preserve that kind of journalism. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pat. So our next slide, colleagues, is about the safety and security of journalists. And we are saying that media houses must ensure continuous safety training for journalists. SANEF will provide all the relevant information on its portal. We are saying SANEF will continue to engage relevant institutions and political parties as well as civil society to speak out against the attack on journalists. SANEF to also engage international bodies to explore solutions to cyberbullying, which, especially as we all know, targets female journalists. SANEF to also work with newsroom managers and other interest groups to promote mental health among journalists. May I invite some inputs in this regard?
Can we bring in Nobisa Katie, who is the SANEF convener for Gauteng, to speak to especially that last point in terms of the work that we're trying to do to raise mental health awareness amongst journalists and to give support. Katie?
I don't see Katie on the call.
Okay, Smooth, do you want to come in there?
Yeah.
All right, let me just try and come in there. SG and Nobis. Colleagues, you'll remember that at the November Council, we said that we must prioritize the issue of mental health support. So what I wanted to update you, and I see that it's coming up time and again, because the reality is that the times are changing, and so do our needs as journalists. I mean, there was a time when we used to laugh off incidences of trauma that we would encounter, either covering stories, but the reality is that what we were doing and what we are doing is to neglect our mental health, general mental health. But what we have done since then, because of the, I think COVID kind of highlighted and put the spotlight on mental health support, on the need actually for mental health support and also training for managers. We have initiated discussions with the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. And Katie has been leading that process. And I'm proud to say that we will be launching that project soon, where we have agreed on a program for our journalists, where they will be getting a special program or access, or actually a service from the SADC, which is the Depression and Anxiety Group, that will help them. So where they can call in and get assistance. We will be rolling out a pilot project in the next week or so, but we are opening this up to journalists to be able to use that service free of charge. And that is part of the work that we had agreed upon, that we said we would initiate, and that plan, or rather that project, is underway. It will be rolled out soon. Thank you, Novisa.
Thank you very much, Sbu. I really think that's one of the, probably one of the most important projects that SANEF is working on, and it's really become, it was birthed from a call from many journalists who really are struggling sometimes, particularly with things that happen on the field. I see there's one, colleagues, you're gonna have to excuse me, because for some reason my screen, there is one hand up. Mahlatse, do you wanna help me figure out who this hand is? Or the person who's raised their hand, if you don't mind coming.
Thanks, Nobisa. It's Janet Heard.
All right, Janet, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? Thanks, Nobisa. Just with regard to mental health, I mean, there's so many issues that have come up this morning, and I could only come in late. So I think it's so, there's so important, these discussions. So just with regard to mental health, I think it's reaching out externally is a very good idea. So I'm encouraged by the reaching out to the Depression and Anxiety Group. From just experience, and I think newsroom managers are just so, and this talks to the whole issue of what we're talking about today, newsroom news editors are so overwhelmed and overworked so they cannot deal with the mental health issues of the staff. I mean, I would be very surprised if and I think it would be good to find out some newsroom managers who have managed to do so, but it's something that is almost separate to the job of news managing. So I think the external input is very valuable, and I would really recommend newsrooms getting the services, in addition to the SANEF initiative, like services of a counselor that they can call on, because it is really out of the reach of newsroom, of journalists, to try and navigate the individual stresses that people have. So the training is really important as a group, but I think the one-on-one is a very vital network that COVID has actually brought into being. COVID's made us realize just how important it is. So I think if we could highlight one thing, it would be that to actually just get that external support, because it goes out of the expertise of newsroom managers. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Janet. I want to take two more hands. I see Judy's hand is up, and then I'll take Kanita after that.
Thanks very much, TG. I just want to strongly support what Janet said. I think, and the work that Katie's doing in setting up sessions with SADC, I think we've got to take them to as many newsrooms as we can, also including community media, very much, radio and print. And also just on the problems with journalist safety and political parties, I think it's time again that we get our own public commitment to a code of conduct with leadership from political parties, to commit to professional conduct towards the media, and make it a public commitment. And then also with the IEC, and they've offered to help us with this too, to encourage the accountability and have a mechanism to monitor any flagrant abuses, etc. And I'm sure with William's help too, we'll be able to have a portal that can work. But I think we actually need to make the politicians commit publicly. I found that when I did it in KwaZulu-Natal, it made a huge difference for at least 3 to 6 months. Doesn't last forever, but it can get you through elections your journeys through in a much safer way. So I think that's something we must take forward as soon as possible again. We have discussed it, I know, we need to act on it, and I know quite a few of us are happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. Kanita, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just to weigh in on the issue of mental health, I think that two points that I wanted to raise is to engender a culture of good mental health instead of dealing with it retrospectively or when it's broken, then fix it, and to just try to have good a good attitude towards mental health, even when journalists are not at the brink of breakdowns and depression. And I think that could be done through a number of ways, is obviously creating constant awareness about it, and as a result fostering good habits about mental health hygiene. So the one way of doing it is perhaps to get expert help to say how do we build resilience, how do that kind of thing. So not bringing in professionals at the end when journalists are broken, or and especially when it comes to online harassment, etc. So a good way to pilot something like this would be local government elections, to, in addition to training around elections, try to build support packs. So whether it's sending emails to journalists to say these are the steps that you can take to access this program that SANEF is doing with SADC, for example, or in-house internal things. But I really would like to stress the importance of not only dealing with the issue of mental health when something has broken and you have people leaving the industry en masse, or you have breakdowns, and then on just a similar point is to normalize it. I know it's expensive, and I know we don't always have the luxury of doing this, but I do think that mental health issues is a media freedom issue, and as long as you're going to have journalists dealing with harassment and etc., it's definitely going to impact our work, and you see it in the number of people that exit the industry as a result of burnout, etc. And so my little contribution is that we need to find ways to be proactive when it comes to mental health, so that you're not waiting for a situation where people are broken and then we're trying to jump in at the end of the process, and that we try to rather foster a sense of good mental health and good mental hygiene in newsrooms and across the industry.
Good point. Thank you very much, Kanita. Chamano, I see your hand is up. Do you want to go ahead?
Oh, thank you so much. I think the points are well covered. Mine perhaps is just to echo the words of the last speaker and what Janet has already said. But I think at the heart of it, I think there's a duty of care, and I want to agree with the sentiments shared to say perhaps maybe managers should not wait until something has happened. They need to be a little bit more proactive, so that if there are issues, at least there are mechanisms to try and address the challenges that might arise. So the duty of care, I think we should not neglect that.
Absolutely. Colleagues, I see we are fast running out of time. I just want to move, I think we've got 2 more slides left. I just want to move to the next one. And I'll try and get us to really move as fast as possible. From these training, we've already spoken about it, that SANEF supports media organizations to continue to provide skills training and development for journalists, that the subcommittee on education and training to ensure that existing newsroom training has adequate provisions for journalists, SANEF to explore how members can contribute to developing a media literacy programs at school level, something that a lot of people have actually quite raised. And then SANEF commits to facilitate training opportunities on race, gender sensitivity reporting, as well as conduct of media practitioners. And I know this comes up quite often, and really kind of becomes quite a point of heated debate. Are there any inputs as far as this is concerned? I see hands, but I'm not sure if it's actually it's old hands.
Can I maybe just say very briefly on the last point, and I'm just trying to think back to the initiative by Judy in KZN, and if one were to think of a big story, the passing of King Goodwill Zwelithini. And I think this point, to me, to a certain extent, it does speak to, those kind of initiatives, the training that we need to be sort of thinking about. I mean, if you were to look back, how many would boldly say they've covered royal matters? It was for the first time, 50 years down the line, a king has passed, and you can sort of see when you sort of pay attention to the different kind of reportage. There were challenges here and there. Yes, there were some really excellent reports. So, and I think it will be important for media houses, perhaps maybe just to zoom into those, kind of stories as well. SANEF, where we can. Like what Judy has done, really, and I still think of an initiative like that as something which was really fantastic. So, yeah, that's really just my point. Thanks.
Thank you, Chamano. Gwen, may I ask you to come through?
Okay, the mic's just come through. Thank you. I'd like to go to the second point, and I would once more like to say what existing newsroom training. And what power do you think E&T has to change things? There is now an excellent QCTO journalist training program. It is an entry program, and it does not deal with continuing professional development. And E&T is working with the relevant CETA and with DHE to try and get additional programs which would take on later career stages added to that, which is the most we can do. But the fact is that most newsrooms are not spending on training at all. And there is no way that E&T on its own has the power to change that. This has to be SANEF and not E&T, and it has to be pressure on media houses, and it may well be that it has to be bigger than SANEF. It has to be part of this broader push towards more ethical journalism, because we have done what we can, but we cannot develop programs that are not being run, with newsroom trainers who don't exist, with interns who, unless they are prepared to work for free, are not being taken into newsrooms. E&T is not the problem here. We have done everything we could to contribute to curriculum development, but we simply do not have the power, the authority, the position to get media owners to reinstitute training where it has lapsed, or to change how they choose to train, because a lot of training is simply for desk jockeys on technical skills related to online media. Where we have the capacity, we can do it. But I think that the target of this second item cannot be E&T alone. It has to be SANEF, and perhaps has to be society more broadly, as with some of these other issues like language.
Thank you very much, Gwen. I think point well taken, and I think rather than necessarily opening up discussion on that particular point that you raised, I think let's take it forward, as SANEF and panel beat it some more and see what interventions, practical interventions, can be made in that regard. May I please take Dunisani?
Okay, no, thanks very much. I want to add on the point number 3 to explore how members can contribute to the development of media literacy program at the school level. If I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me well, I think it was during Lumkon's time at MDDA. Once approached, the minister. In fact, there was a principal agreement that Department of Basic Education, they're going to use community media, more especially the one that are publishing in African languages, to have those literacy program. Because remember the community newspaper, that the one that reaching every corner of the country compared to the mainstream. So I think on this point, SANEF is standing a good chance to win on this one. So if we can manage to have a chat with the Minister of Education, probably we can go to LUMCO and ask for the advice, or how far it was during that time, so that we can kickstart this program. Because if you can remember very well, most of the school they've got libraries, but they don't have the reading material. So if you can put our proposal together to go to the Department of Education, this is who we are, this is what we want to do, this is what we want to achieve. I think they're going to take our proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Dunsani. Colleagues, again, we're running out of time. May I please just ask Mahlatse to come in? I see your hand is up.
Okay,
and then I'm going to ask that we move.
It was actually just a quick one to say that I was quite impressed engaging with a group of young people trying to decide if they should become journalists. And they were telling me that as part of their test that they wrote this week, there was actually a question about the role of media in our democracy. So that got me thinking that there is really some base. I'm sure if we were to engage with the Department of Education, because clearly somewhere that has found itself in the curriculum, and it maybe is a matter of how do we as journalists in the trade then support the department and just enhance what is available and what is out there.
Thank you. Thanks, Mahlatse. Team, may I ask that we move to the next slide, which I think is about the Media Sustainability Fund. I'll take just a very few hands and then we'll wrap up. Okay, there we go. So I think we've established that, SANEF is to champion the establishment of a Media Sustainability Fund, the promotion of access to public interest news. I know there was a great big debate about what we define as public interest news, to foster competition in the digital economy. I see the slide is quite jumbled, but essentially to explore tax relief and other state support mechanisms. May I invite inputs in this regard? I think Isaac earlier really explained, what some of these interventions are, and as I said, the report is out for us to engage on. Wara, I see your hand is up.
Okay, my hand was up in the previous debate, but anyway, I think I can maybe give my 2 cents.
Very quick one then. Please assist me, Mshaba.
Okay. Look, I think we all have to agree and support the initiative of sustainability in the industry. But I also want to add that I think we also need to take into account the role that's played by the holding companies, of big media companies, and I think we need to take them into account, what is it that they're doing in their assets in making sure that this industry doesn't only look at capital induced, but looks at it in a very much more holistic environment. And the idea of creating and taxing, I think ideally these actual facts, these industries have to be taxed. Because we're talking about, I mean, look at NASPA, it's a petroleum company, it's one of the biggest companies in the world, you know what I mean? And what is it that instead of promoting the industry itself, instead they're firing people, you know, and that's not fair for the industry. That's not good, you know. They should account, and I think that's one of the important things. And secondly, one of the important things, I think we need unity in the industry, you know, and some of the problems that we're having, you know, are because of the breakdown of print media South Africa. And we need an understanding and know where we're going, because now we are all caught up in corporate wars we don't know anything about. You know? Our interest might be good with SANEF and everybody else, you know, but there's these big corporates hovering us who are doing what we don't know what's happening there, you know. So part of the sustainability project, I think they should be come to the table. They should have been here so that they can account and for a way forward. Sharp.
Thank you very much, Warapa Joe.
I just need to understand the third bullet, the foster competition. What does it actually mean?
May I bring in Isaac? Sure. Isaac, go ahead.
Yes. In fact, when I adjusted the slides for the presentation, I changed that heading to say fair competition, because we're really looking at here how the traditional media organizations can coexist in the same industry with tech platforms. If tech platforms start to eat up all our advertising, how can that be fair competition? So essentially, if you look at what's been happening in the Australian industry, on the deal reached via government legislation between media organizations and big tech, so that big tech support news media in some other way. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should go the Australian way. There are many other models like the US, and in the report you can read more about it, and in the EU, for instance. So I think it is really about how do you find a balance in the market so that both news media can exist alongside big tech.
Thank you very much, Isaac. Colleagues, unfortunately, I have to wrap this conversation up now. Thank you very much for your insights, and thank you for all the interventions that you've proposed. This conversation obviously continues, and I want to call my colleague to wrap up for the day, Adrian Basson, who is our Deputy Chair at SANEF. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Nwabisa and colleagues, for joining us today. Colleagues, I think we can all agree that it has been a fantastic morning/afternoon of many learnings, lots to take forward, specifically around topics of getting closer to our communities, making sure that we are in earshot of our readers and not only speaking to ourselves in an echo chamber. I think that's one of the big learnings I took from this morning from a number of presentations. And I think the way Alan Rusbridger put it is that we have to be better attuned to what our readers and communities want us bearing witness. Also, the need for quality journalism lies at the heart of the sustainability of an ethical journalism future. To be better than the internet was also a quote I will remember, something that will distinguish us from the information out there on tech. And then lastly, the confirmation by Judge Kathy, as we also heard earlier recently from President Ramaphosa in his testimony at the Zondo Commission, that we remain moved by our patriotism and love for the country. My job is the easy and nicest one of the day, and that is really to thank. So I still first want to thank our sponsors, without which the entire ethics investigation by Judge Satchwell and her panel would not have been possible, but also today. They are the Wraith Foundation, APSA, and the Social Justice Initiative. Can I ask those with their mics on just to give a round of applause for our sponsors? We also accept virtual claps if you want to use the clap button. Then I would like to thank, in her absence, Judge Satchwell and her panelists, who put together this magnificent piece of research that has really become the bedrock of our conversations going forward, for their hard work over many months. I want to thank today's speakers, Songezo Zibi, Alan Rusbridger, and Judge Bernard Mwepe, for availing themselves to talk to us about matters close to the heart. The organizers of today's conference, alongside SANEF, was Paula Frey and frayintermedia. Thank you very much, Paula, to you and your team for putting together a very excellent and glitch-free experience. The SANEF subcommittee responsible for organizing today, Mkhatsi, our SG and team, thank you so much for pulling this off. It's been a long journey. It's been a long road since we first decided to do research on ethics, and here we are. All the speakers and everyone who participated during the webinars, and the council members who agreed to volunteer to facilitate these webinars, thank you very much to each of you. I specifically also want to single out our former executive director, Kate Skinner, Dr. Kate Skinner, who was absolutely pivotal and central to putting together this project. Kate, I know you're here with us today. I'm so glad to see you here, and thank you so much for your continued input and support of SANEF now and going forward. I want to specifically also recognize Professor Thuli Madonsela, the former public protector who was with us today participating and attending this session. Professor Madonsela, thank you so much for always being a supporter of free media, free speech, and media freedom in South Africa. And then to each and every one of you who joined us today in this very special conference. Hopefully we can have it next year in person, all with our vaccinations in our shoulders, and see each other also across a cup of coffee or something stronger. Thank you so much for joining us today. Stay safe, and let's keep fighting the good fight.